Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Have you ever felt that moment when silence becomes too perfect? When the absence of sound itself becomes a presence in the room, pressing against your eardrums like an invisible weight? The descent into the underground laboratory began with such a silence. My name is Marcus Webb, and was, a doctoral candidate in archaeological anthropology at Westmore University. Our team had spent 3 years tracing rumors of the Harlow Research Facility, a Cold War-era underground laboratory allegedly used for psychological experiments before being abandoned in the late 60s. Most of my colleagues had dismissed it as academic folklore, but Professor Eleanor Keene believed otherwise. "This is it," Eleanor whispered, her flashlight beam trembling slightly as it illuminated the rusted metal door embedded in the limestone face. We stood at the bottom of a natural sinkhole, 20 miles from the nearest paved road in the Appalachian wilderness. The morning fog still clung to the trees above us, filtering the sunlight into ghostly beams that barely reached where we stood. I glanced at the others, Tessa with her digital camera already documenting every detail, Ryan checking our equipment with methodical precision, and Liv hanging back slightly, her usually confident expression betraying a hint of apprehension. "Are we certain this is safe?" Liv asked, adjusting her backpack. "The structural integrity after all these years." "The geological survey confirmed it's stable," Eleanor interrupted, producing a set of heavy iron keys she'd obtained from some government archive. "These facilities were built to withstand nuclear attack." The key turned with surprising ease, as if the lock had been recently oiled. The door released a soft hiss, a change in air pressure that made my ears pop slightly. "Wait," Ryan said, holding up a device. "Let me check oxygen levels first." But Eleanor was already pushing through, her excitement overriding caution. One by one, we followed her into a narrow concrete corridor, our flashlights cutting through darkness that seemed almost viscous in its density. The air inside was cool and dry, with an underlying staleness that spoke of decades without circulation. Yet there was something else, a subtle metallic tang that reminded me vaguely of the taste of batteries. I found myself breathing shallowly, irrationally afraid of taking too much of the air into my lungs. "The main laboratory should be through here, according to the schematics," Eleanor called from ahead, her voice echoing strangely down the corridor. The echoes seemed to linger too long, as if the sound waves were trapped in the confined space. Our lights revealed peeling paint on concrete walls, exposed conduits, and occasional doors with faded numerical designations. Most were locked, but a few stood partly open, revealing small offices or storage spaces stripped of anything useful decades ago. "Look at this," Tessa called, her light fixed on a wall where someone had scrawled a message in what looked like chalk. "The bell must not ring." "Probably maintenance staff," Ryan suggested with forced casualness, referring to some alarm system. I traced my fingers over the letters. The chalk felt oddly warm, and came away on my fingertips not as dust but as something slightly oily. I wiped it quickly on my jeans, suppressing a shudder. The corridor opened suddenly into a vast circular chamber, our lights insufficient to illuminate its full extent. The ceiling rose at least 30 feet above us, with metal walkways crisscrossing the upper space. At the center stood what appeared to be a massive bronze bell, suspended from an elaborate framework of iron and steel. "This isn't in any of the documentation," Eleanor whispered, her academic excitement momentarily overshadowed by confusion. The bell itself was beautiful in a severe way, its surface etched with intricate symbols that didn't match any archaeological classification I recognized. They weren't runes or hieroglyphs or any ancient script I could identify. They seemed to shift slightly when viewed directly, becoming clearer only in peripheral vision. "There's writing all around the base," Liv said, moving closer. "In multiple languages. I can make out Latin and Greek, something that might be Sanskrit." I joined her, focusing my light on the text nearest to me, "Audit Campanam audit vocem mortuorum." My Latin was rusty, but I could piece together the meaning. Who hears the bell hears the voices of the dead. "This isn't a psychological research facility," Ryan said, his voice tight. "This is something else entirely." Eleanor approached the bell with the reverence of someone who had discovered a long-lost treasure. "This changes everything about our understanding of Cold War experimental programs," she murmured, already reaching for her notebook. I moved my light along the walls, finding control panels and observation windows looking into smaller chambers. The glass was remarkably intact, but what lay beyond was difficult to discern. As I swept my beam across the far wall, I caught a glimpse of my own reflection, except the figure in the glass turned its head slightly before I did. I jerked back, my heart suddenly pounding. "Did anyone else feel that?" Tessa asked abruptly. "Feel what?" I managed to ask. "Like a vibration through the floor. Very faint." We all stood motionless, sensing for it. Then I felt it too, a subtle tremor beneath our feet, rhythmic like a distant heartbeat. "It's probably just the generators," Eleanor said without conviction. "Ryan, see if you can get some of these lights working. There must be a backup power system." Ryan moved to one of the control panels, his technical expertise making him the obvious choice. The rest of us spread out, examining different sections of the laboratory. I found myself drawn to a smaller door almost hidden behind one of the observation stations. It opened into what appeared to be a record room, walls lined with filing cabinets and shelves laden with leather-bound journals. The organization system was meticulous, dates and subject numbers rather than names. I pulled out one journal at random, dated November 1962. Subject exhibits heightened sensitivity to the frequencies. Auditory hallucinations began at the 15-minute mark, visual manifestations at 23 minutes. Subject reports hearing their deceased mother's voice with perfect clarity. Termination of experiment at 30 minutes when subject began self-harm behaviors. Recovery protocol implemented, but residual effects persist at 48 hours. I closed the journal, suddenly uncomfortable with the clinical detachment with which human suffering was documented. As I went to return it to its place, I noticed that several of the filing cabinets had labels for successful transitions and failed containments. A sharp crack from the main chamber made me jump. I hurried back to find the others gathered around Ryan at the control panel. "I've got it," he announced as lights flickered overhead, coming to life in sequence around the perimeter of the room until the entire chamber was bathed in harsh fluorescent illumination. Backup generators still had some juice. In the improved light, the bell was even more impressive and unsettling. The bronze surface seemed to pulse slightly, as if breathing. The symbols etched into its surface appeared to writhe when not looked at directly, like insects crawling across metal. "This place gives me the creeps," Liv said, voicing what we were all feeling. "The sooner we document everything and get out, the better." Eleanor was already photographing the bell from multiple angles. "We need to understand what this place was truly researching. Cold War psychological experimentation is one thing, but this..." She gestured at the bell. This suggests something far more esoteric. I found research journals in that room, I said, pointing to the records room. They were conducting experiments on what they called frequencies and their effects on human subjects. Sound-based psychological manipulation was a documented CIA interest during that period, Eleanor mused. This seems different, I insisted. They were recording subjects hearing voices of dead relatives. A sudden clatter from one of the side chambers silenced our discussion. We all turned toward the sound. Probably just settling, Ryan suggested. This place has been abandoned for decades. But the sound came again, more deliberate this time, like metal being dragged across tile. Hello? Eleanor called out, her scientific curiosity overriding common sense. Is someone there? The silence that followed seemed to stretch indefinitely. Then, very faintly, I heard it, a whisper that seemed to come not from any specific direction but from the walls themselves. Marcus. I froze, certain I had imagined it. Then I saw Tessa's wide eyes fixed on me. Did you hear that? She whispered. Before I could answer, the lights flickered once, twice, and then stabilized, but now they emitted a subtly different quality of light, slightly redder than before. And the gentle vibration beneath our feet had intensified, becoming a steady pulse that seemed to match the rhythm of my increasingly rapid heartbeat. We need to go, I said, surprising myself with the urgency in my voice. Now. Don't be ridiculous, Eleanor scoffed. We've barely begun to document the site. But Ryan was already backing toward the corridor through which we'd entered. Marcus is right. Something's not right here. It's an abandoned laboratory, Eleanor said. Of course it's unsettling. But we're scientists, not teenagers in a horror movie. As if in response to her dismissal, the bell at the center of the room emitted a soft tone, not a ring, exactly, but a gentle harmonic that seemed to resonate directly inside my skull rather than through the air. Judging by the way the others winced, they felt it too. That's impossible, Eleanor whispered. No one touched it. The vibration increased, and the sound grew incrementally louder. The symbols on the bell's surface seemed to glow faintly now, pulsing in rhythm with the tone. The doors! Liv suddenly shouted. I turned to see the heavy metal door through which we'd entered slowly swinging closed despite no one being near it. Ryan lunged toward it, but it shut with a definitive clang before he could reach it. The sound echoed through the chamber, transforming into something that sounded disturbingly like distant laughter. We were trapped in the chamber, the vibrations beneath our feet intensifying, the bell's hum growing deeper and somehow hungry, and all around us, the walls began to whisper our names. The five of us stood frozen in the circular chamber, our scientific objectivity rapidly crumbling as the vibrations beneath our feet intensified. The bell's subtle hum had transformed into a low, persistent drone that seemed to resonate with something primal in my brainstem. I felt it not just in my ears, but in my teeth, my sinuses, down my spine. This has to be some kind of automated system, Eleanor insisted, though her voice had lost its usual authoritative edge. Ryan, check the control panels again. There must be a way to override the door mechanism. Ryan moved reluctantly toward the main console, his flashlight beam jittering across the ancient switches and dials. Most of this technology is analog, he reported. No computerized systems to hack. The whispers from the walls continued, sometimes unintelligible murmurs, sometimes startlingly clear utterances of our names. I wasn't sure if the others heard exactly what I did, but their tense postures and darting eyes confirmed they were experiencing something similar. We need to document this, Tessa said suddenly, lifting her camera. The flash illuminated the chamber in stark white light for a split second, and in that instant, I could have sworn I saw figures standing in the observation rooms beyond the glass, watching us. When the flash faded, the windows showed only darkness again. Did anyone else see that? I asked, my mouth dry. See what? Liv asked sharply. I hesitated. Nothing. Just shadows. Eleanor had approached the bell, studying its surface with scholarly determination that seemed increasingly at odds with our situation. These symbols resemble those found in certain French occult practices from the early 20th century, she observed. Groups that believed they could communicate with, or even manipulate, the boundary between the living and the dead. So this isn't military research? Liv asked. Oh, it absolutely is, Eleanor replied. The military has funded research into psychic phenomena and the paranormal for decades. Project MKUltra, Project Stargate, all documented now. But this... She gestured at the bell. This suggests they went much further than the declassified records indicate. The whispers suddenly increased in volume, becoming a cacophony of overlapping voices. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it made no difference. The sound seemed to bypass my ears entirely, manifesting directly in my consciousness. Marcus Webb, we've been waiting. The ceremony was never completed. You can hear us now. Make it stop. Tessa cried out, dropping to her knees, her camera clattering to the floor. As suddenly as it had intensified, the whispers subsided back to barely audible murmurs. The relief was momentary, however, as the fluorescent lights began to flicker in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate, like Morse code or some other signaling system. The bell is the key, Eleanor said, her face illuminated in the erratic flashes. Whatever experiments they were conducting, that bell was central to them. Then maybe we should stay the hell away from it, Ryan suggested, still working frantically at the control panel. I found myself drawn to one of the observation windows, where I was certain I'd seen figures during the camera flash. Pressing my flashlight against the glass to reduce reflection, I peered into the darkened room beyond. It appeared to be some kind of monitoring station, with antiquated equipment arranged to face a central chair bolted to the floor. Metal restraints hung open from the armrests. They were monitoring subjects who were exposed to the bell. I called back to the others. This looks like where they would place people during experiments. People? Or victims? Liv muttered. I was about to respond when my flashlight beam caught something moving in the far corner of the observation room. I jerked the light back, but whatever I'd glimpsed had retreated into darkness again. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead as I kept the beam steady, waiting. Then it emerged slowly into the light, a hand, pale and withered, its fingers unnaturally elongated. It pressed against the glass from the other side, leaving no condensation despite the coldness of the room. The rest of the figure remained in shadow, but I could make out the vague outline of a gaunt form. I stumbled backward with a strangled cry, tripping over my own feet and landing hard on the concrete floor. Marcus. Eleanor rushed to my side. What is it? I pointed wordlessly at the window, but when we both looked, there was nothing there, just an empty observation room filled with abandoned equipment. I saw someone, I insisted, my voice shaking. A hand, reaching out from the shadow. Eleanor helped me to my feet, her expression concerned but skeptical. The human mind is remarkably susceptible to suggestion, she said gently. Especially in environments designed to induce psychological stress. I know what I saw, I insisted, though doubt was already creeping in. Had it been a trick of the light? A reflection? Listen. Liv suddenly hissed, holding up her hand for silence. We all froze, straining to hear. At first, there was nothing beyond the omnipresent hum of the bell and the whispers that had become almost like background noise. Then I heard it, footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the corridor beyond the sealed entrance door. "Someone else is here," Ryan whispered unnecessarily. We collectively backed away from the entrance, clustering near the bell despite our instinctive aversion to it. The footsteps drew closer, stopping just outside the door. A moment of agonizing silence followed, then a metallic scraping sound, like keys being inserted into a lock. The massive door swung open, revealing a silhouette framed in the darkness of the corridor. For one wild moment, I expected some nightmarish apparition, but instead, a very human figure stepped into the light, a man in his 70s, dressed in practical outdoor clothing, with a weathered face and alert eyes that surveyed us with surprising composure. "You shouldn't be here," he said simply. "None of you should be here." "Who are you?" Eleanor demanded, reflexively assuming the role of authority. "Howard Mercer," the man replied. "I was a technician here. One of the few who survived." He glanced at the bell, his expression hardening. "And I've spent the last 50 years making sure no one rings the damn thing again." A collective exhalation seemed to ripple through our group. Here was something concrete, something explainable, a living person with knowledge of this place. "Mr. Mercer," Eleanor stepped forward, academic interest rekindled. "We're researchers from Westmore University. We're documenting abandoned Cold War facilities. Can you tell us what exactly was happening here?" Howard's gaze shifted between us, assessing. "How long have you been in this room?" Ryan checked his watch. "Maybe 30 minutes?" Howard nodded grimly. "Then it's already started. You've heard them, haven't you? The whispers. The voices calling your names." The directness of his question sent a chill through me. So we weren't imagining it. What exactly was this facility researching, Mr. Mercer? I asked. "Now what?" "Who?" Howard moved further into the room, keeping a respectful distance from the bell. "Project Threshold," they called it officially. The goal was communication with the deceased, or so they claimed at the beginning. By the end, I think the actual goal was something far more ambitious. "You're talking about speaking with the dead," Liz said flatly. "That's not possible. 20 years ago, I would have agreed with you," Howard replied. "But this bell," he gestured toward the massive bronze instrument, was designed using mathematical principles that allow certain sound frequencies to penetrate what the scientists call the membrane. The theoretical barrier between our world and wherever it is we go after. The whispering from the walls suddenly intensified again, as if responding to Howard's explanation. This time, I distinctly heard my mother's voice among them, which was impossible, as she was very much alive back in Boston. "The whispers aren't just random," Howard continued, seemingly unaffected by the increase in paranormal activity. "They're targeted, personalized. The bell doesn't just open a channel to the deceased, it opens a channel to what lies beyond death itself. And what lies there isn't what any religion or philosophy prepared us for." Eleanor, ever the skeptic, crossed her arms. "You expect us to believe that this is some kind of supernatural telephone?" "I don't care what you believe, Dr. Keene," Howard replied, surprising us with his knowledge of Eleanor's name, though none of us had introduced ourselves. "What matters is that you leave before the resonance pattern fully establishes itself. The bell doesn't need to be physically rung anymore. Your presence, living human consciousness in this chamber, is enough to start the process after all these years of dormancy." As if on cue, The vibrations beneath our feet intensified, and the hum from the bell grew louder, a deep, sonorous note that seemed to bypass my eardrums and resonate directly with my bones. "How do you know my name?" Eleanor demanded, but her usual confidence was faltering. Howard gestured to the walls. "They told me. They know all of you now. Marcus Webb, Eleanor Keene, Ryan Donnelly, Olivia Hartman, Tessa Reyes." He recited our full names with unerring accuracy. They'd been waiting for someone to return, to complete what was started. What exactly was started? I asked, dreading the answer. Howard's expression darkened. In 1965, Dr. Victor Wayland, the lead researcher, became convinced that the barrier between worlds could be not just crossed, but permanently altered. He believed the bell could be used to fundamentally change the relationship between the living and the dead. The final experiment involved 13 subjects placed in a circle around the bell. "What happened to them?" Tessa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. 12 died instantly when the bell was struck. Their bodies remained, but whatever makes a person themselves, soul, consciousness, whatever you want to call it, was gone. The 13th, Dr. Wayland himself, disappeared entirely. No physical trace remained. "That's not possible," Ryan insisted. The experiment was shut down immediately. The facility was sealed, all records classified at the highest level. Those of us who witnessed it were sworn to secrecy, relocated, given new identities. Howard's gaze swept across our faces. But I couldn't stay away. Something pulls me back here periodically, to make sure the bell stays silent. The laboratory suddenly plunged into darkness as the backup power failed again. In the pitch black, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, surrounding us completely. When the emergency lights flickered a moments later, bathing everything in a blood-red glow, I noticed something that turned my blood to ice. The walls were now covered in writing, names, dates, equations, and fragments of text in multiple languages, appearing to have been carved or scratched into the concrete. "They'd never manifested this quickly before," Howard said, alarm evident in his voice. "Your presence has accelerated the process." Eleanor had moved to examine the nearest section of wall, her scientific curiosity seemingly overriding her fear. "These dates, they're from the future," she said, her voice strained. "Including tomorrow's date." "And the names," Liv added, staring at another section. "They're ours." Over and over again. Indeed, our 5 names were repeated countless times across the walls, interspersed with words and languages I didn't recognize. In some places, the writing appeared to be in blood, still glistening wet under the emergency lights. In others, it looked burned into the concrete, as if by intense heat. "We need to leave. Now." Howard turned toward the door, but his expression fell as he saw it was closed again. "No, no, no. This is happening too fast." He rushed to the door, pulling uselessly at the handle. "The resonance pattern is establishing faster than ever before. The barrier is already thinning." As if to emphasize his point, the bell emitted a deep, reverberating tone that seemed to pass through my body like a physical force. I doubled over, my vision momentarily blurring. When it cleared, I saw something that defied explanation. The air around the bell had begun to shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot pavement, but with a viscous quality that suggested something more substantial than mere distortion of light. "What's happening?" Tessa cried, backing away from the bell. Howard's face had gone ashen. "The membrane is becoming visible." It only happens when he stopped abruptly, his gaze fixed on something over my shoulder. I turned slowly, following his line of sight to one of the observation windows. The glass now appeared to be rippling like the surface of a disturbed pond, and behind it, pressed against the undulating surface, were faces, dozens of them, their features distorted and elongated, mouths open in silent screams or pleas. "Don't look at them," Howard warned. "Too late. Don't acknowledge them. That's how they find a way through." But Liv was already staring, transfixed, at one particular face, a middle-aged man whose features bore some resemblance to her own. "Dad," she whispered, taking an involuntary step toward the window. "Liv, no!" I lunged toward her, but the floor beneath me suddenly felt insubstantial, as if I were walking on a membrane stretched over an infinite void. My balance faltered, and I stumbled to my knees. The whispers had become a roar now, a torrent of voices speaking over each other in countless languages, some human, others distinctly not. Among them, I could pick out phrases with terrifying clarity. The circle must be completed. 13 souls to bridge the worlds. The unfinished ritual awaits its conclusion. And most chilling of all, in what sounded like the collective voice of many speaking as one, 5 have arrived willingly. 8 more will be called. Howard was frantically searching the walls, running his hands along the concrete as if looking for something hidden. "There's an emergency protocol," he called over the cacophony. "A countermeasure they installed after the incident. If I can just find—" His words cut off as the bell emitted another powerful tone, this one so intense that I felt blood trickle from my nose. Through watering eyes, I saw that the space around the bell had become even more distorted, the air seeming to fold and unfold in impossible geometries. And within that distortion, a figure was taking shape, humanoid but wrong somehow, its proportions subtly askew, its movements jerky and unnatural. As it solidified, I realized with horror that I recognized the face emerging from the chaos. It was mine. My doppelganger stared at me with eyes that held nothing human behind them, its mouth stretching into a smile far too wide for any human face. When it spoke, its voice was mine, but layered with countless others. "Welcome home, Marcus Webb. We've been practicing your voice for so long." I scrambled backward until I hit the wall, unable to tear my gaze away from this impossible mirror image of myself. Around me, I was dimly aware of my companions facing similar horrors, each confronted by their own doppelganger emerging from the distorted space around the bell. "Don't listen to them," Howard shouted, still searching the walls desperately. "They're not who they appear to be." My double took a step toward me, its movements disjointed, as if it were a puppet being operated by someone with only a vague understanding of how human bodies worked. "You can hear us so clearly now," it said, its voice resonating directly in my mind rather than through the air. "Soon you will join us. Your voice will join the chorus." The walls were bleeding now, a viscous black fluid seeping from between the concrete blocks. The whispers had become screams, the vibrations of violent shaking that threatened to tear the chamber apart. Through it all, the bell continued its dreadful song, each tone driving the breakdown of reality further. "There!" Howard suddenly shouted, his fingers finding a recessed panel in the wall. He wrenched it open to reveal a simple red button protected by a glass cover. Without hesitation, he smashed the glass with his elbow and slammed his palm down on the button. A deafening alarm blared through the chamber, drowning out even the screams from the walls. Overhead sprinklers activated, but what rained down wasn't water, it was a silvery liquid that hissed and steamed where it touched the floor or our skin. It didn't burn, but left a numbing sensation wherever it made contact. The effect on our doppelgangers was immediate and dramatic. They writhed and contorted, their forms losing cohesion, features melting like wax figures in a furnace. The distortion around the bell began to collapse in on itself, the impossible geometries folding away into dimensions I couldn't perceive. Neutralizing agent, Howard explained breathlessly as the chaos began to subside. Developed specifically to disrupt the frequency patterns. The heavy metal door swung open again with a grinding sound, revealing the dark corridor beyond. "Run," Howard commanded. "The effect is temporary. We have maybe 5 minutes before the countermeasures are neutralized by the resonance." We didn't need to be told twice. As the chamber descended into a new kind of chaos, this one marked by the retreat of the paranormal rather than its advance, we bolted for the exit, the silver liquid still raining down from above, coating our hair and clothes as we fled through the now open door. The corridor ahead stretched into darkness, illuminated only by our wildly swinging flashlights as we ran. Behind us, the bell's tone changed to something almost mournful, like a predator watching prey escape its grasp, for now. And all around us, the walls continued to whisper our names, promising that this was only the beginning. We stumbled through the darkened corridor, the silver substance from the sprinklers dripping from our clothes and hair. Howard led the way, his familiarity with the labyrinthine facility guiding us deeper rather than toward the exit I desperately craved. "Shouldn't we be going out?" Ryan gasped, voicing my thoughts as we rounded another corner. "Not yet," Howard replied tersely. "The neutralizing agent is temporary. We need something more permanent before we attempt to leave, or they'll follow us to the surface." The whispers had diminished to a background murmur, but they still persisted, like a radio tuned between stations. Occasionally, a phrase would come through with disturbing clarity. "The ritual remains incomplete. 13 souls to bridge the gap. 5 arrived willingly." Eleanor, who had remained remarkably composed throughout, finally broke her scientific detachment. "This is impossible," she muttered, but whether to convince us or herself wasn't clear. "Sound waves cannot manipulate physical reality." "These aren't just sound waves," Howard responded, pausing at a junction of corridors and seemingly making a decision based on criteria none of us could perceive. "The bell operates on principles that blur the line between acoustics, quantum mechanics, and other forces science hasn't properly categorized yet." He led us down a narrower passage that descended at a subtle angle, taking us even deeper underground. The air grew colder, and the concrete walls gave way to rough-hewn stone that suggested this section predated the rest of the facility. "Where are you taking us?" Liv demanded, her voice tight with controlled panic. "The archives," Howard answered. "If we want to survive this, we need to understand what we're facing. And more importantly, how to stop it." Tessa had been unusually quiet since our encounter in the bell chamber. Now she spoke, her voice small and frightened. "The faces in the glass, were they really dead?" Howard finished for her. "Not exactly. The entities you saw exist in a state that defies our binary concept of living versus deceased. They occupy a liminal space, what the researchers call the echo. We emerged into a cavernous room lined with metal filing cabinets and glass-fronted bookcases. Unlike the main laboratory, this space appeared meticulously maintained, no dust, no signs of abandonment. Electric lights flickered on automatically as we entered, revealing a circular arrangement of desks surrounding a central pedestal where a miniature replica of the bell sat under a glass dome. "You've been maintaining this place," Eleanor observed, her academic curiosity reasserting itself. Howard nodded, moving to one of the cabinets and withdrawing a ring of keys from his pocket. "Someone had to preserve the knowledge, in case." He hesitated. "In case what happened today ever occurred." "You knew someone would eventually find this place," I said, the realization dawning on me. I knew someone was meant to, he corrected, selecting a key and opening one of the cabinets. The echo has been calling. For decades. Getting louder. More insistent. I've intercepted multiple expeditions over the years, urban explorers, conspiracy theorists, paranormal investigators. I managed to turn them away with various tactics. But you, he gave Eleanor a pointed look. You had the right connections to get past the governmental barriers. You were more persistent than the others. Because I had actual historical documentation, Eleanor defended herself. Department of Defense records that she stopped suddenly, her eyes widening. Those records found me, didn't they? They weren't misfiled or declassified by accident. Howard didn't answer directly. Instead, he removed a leather-bound volume from the cabinet and placed it on the nearest desk. Project Threshold began in 1953 as an attempt to create the perfect interrogation tool. The theory was simple: use specific sound frequencies to stimulate areas of the brain associated with fear and suggestion. But Dr. Whalen discovered something unexpected during the trials. He opened the book, revealing pages of handwritten notes accompanied by intricate diagrams. Subjects exposed to certain harmonic combinations reported hearing voices. Not hallucinations, actual voices providing verifiable information the subjects couldn't possibly have known. Auditory pareidolia, Eleanor suggested weakly. The tendency to hear patterns in random noise. That was the official explanation, until test subject 8 correctly identified the contents of a sealed envelope in a locked room 3 floors away. Howard countered, turning the page to reveal transcripts of experiment sessions. Then described in detail a conversation happening at that exact moment between 2 researchers in another building. Ryan had wandered to one of the glass bookcases, examining what appeared to be artifacts, small objects arranged on velvet-lined shelves. What are these? Objects that have been exposed to the bell's resonance for extended periods, Howard explained. Don't touch the glass. They'd become conduits. I moved closer to see what had caught Ryan's attention. The items appeared mundane at first glance: a pocket watch, a fountain pen, a child's spinning top. But as I looked more carefully, I noticed that they all exhibited subtle movement when not observed directly, the watch hands spinning rapidly in my peripheral vision but stopping when I focused on them, the top seeming to wobble of its own accord when glimpsed from the corner of my eye. The barrier between worlds isn't uniform, Howard continued, flipping through the journal. It's thinner in some places than others. This location was chosen because it sits at what Whalen called a pressure point, a place where the membrane between realities has natural vulnerabilities. Like a fault line, Tessa suggested, some of her scholarly interest returning. Exactly, Howard nodded. The bell was designed to exploit those vulnerabilities, to vibrate at frequencies that would essentially wear away at the barrier. The whispers from the walls suddenly intensified, and I felt a pressure in my ears, as if the air itself were being compressed. Howard looked up sharply. They're regrouping faster than I expected, he muttered. The neutralizing agent should have bought us more time. What exactly are they? I asked, dreading the answer. Howard closed the journal slowly. That's the question that drove Whalen to madness, he said, his voice dropping to near a whisper. At first, the research team believed they were contacting human spirits, the consciousness of the deceased that lingered in some adjacent reality. But as the experiments progressed, they realized something far more disturbing. He moved to another cabinet, selecting a different key. The entities in the echo aren't simply human spirits. Some perhaps were once, but they've been changed by whatever exists in that space between worlds. Others never were human at all. The cabinet opened to reveal not files but a collection of audio reels and antiquated recording equipment. These are the only surviving recordings of the actual experiments, Howard explained, carefully extracting one of the reels. Most were destroyed in the aftermath of the final experiment. These were hidden by one of the junior researchers who couldn't let go of what we discovered. You? Eleanor guessed. Howard nodded almost imperceptibly as he threaded the reel onto a playback machine that looked like it belonged in a museum. I was 23, fresh out of technical school, hired to maintain the recording equipment. I wasn't supposed to understand what I was documenting. He hesitated before pressing the play button. What you're about to hear, it's from the last successful communication session before the final experiment. 3 days before everything went wrong. The machine hummed to life, the reel spinning as crackling static filled the room. Then a clinical male voice emerged from the speaker. Session 47, subject designation Echo 9. October 12, 1965. Present, Dr. Victor Wayland, Dr. Harriet Schaefer, Technical Officer Howard Mercer, Subject Lillian Dawes. Miss Dawes has been exposed to the resonance pattern for cumulative 37 hours across 6 sessions and has demonstrated exceptional receptivity. There was a shuffling sound, then a different male voice, presumably Wayland. Miss Dawes, can you hear me? A young woman's voice responded, her words slightly slurred as if drugged. Yes, Doctor. The frequency is established. Are you receiving any impressions? A pause, then, they're here again. All around us. Who is here, Lillian? Another pause, longer this time. When the woman spoke again, her voice had changed subtly, the same vocal cords, but with different inflections, different patterns of speech. We are many. We have always been many. Wayland's voice betrayed excitement barely contained by scientific decorum. We've spoken before. You called yourselves the Chorus. Is that correct? Names are difficult. Chorus serves. Where do you exist, Chorus? Between. Always between. The space between breaths. The moment between thoughts. The silence between heartbeats. Are you what humans call the dead? A sound that might have been laughter, but distorted, overlapping, as if multiple voices were laughing simultaneously through the same mouth. Some were as you are. Most were never born. Some will be but never were. Time moves differently in the echo. What is the echo? The space between spaces. The membrane between worlds grown thin with pressure. We press against it. We have always pressed against it. What do you want? The overlapping laughter again, chilling in its alienness. To sing together. To complete the song. 13 voices to break the barrier. 13 souls to bridge the worlds. Wayland's voice sharpened. 13 souls? Is that what's required for permanent contact? 13 willingly given. 13 around the bell. The circle must be completed. A sudden commotion on the tape, chairs scraping, papers rustling, then Wayland again, his voice urgent. Miss Dawes is convulsing. Get the medical team in here immediately. The woman's voice returned, but now it was a cacophony of overlapping voices speaking through her, some whispering, some screaming, in a mixture of languages both recognizable and utterly alien. We will come through. We have always been coming through. The bell calls you as the circle awaits completion. 13 souls to bridge the worlds. Your world will become echo, and echo will become world. The barriers fall, the membrane tears. We come, we come, we come. Howard switched off the recording abruptly. the silence that followed heavy with implication. 3 days later, Wayland assembled 12 subjects plus himself around the bell, he said quietly. He had become convinced that establishing permanent contact with the echo would represent the greatest scientific breakthrough in human history. Access to all knowledge, past and future. Communication with higher intelligences. Perhaps even a form of immortality. But it went wrong, Liz said, her voice barely audible. Catastrophically, Howard confirmed. When the bell rang, something tore. Like fabric ripping. The 12 subjects collapsed instantly, brain death, the medical team determined later. But their bodies remained, breathing, hearts beating. Empty vessels. And Wayland simply vanished. No trace of him was ever found. And the circle was never completed, I said slowly, understanding dawning. The ritual, or experiment, or whatever it was interrupted. Left unfinished. Howard nodded gravely. The facility was sealed, the project buried under layers of classification. The official record states that there was a gas leak that killed 13 researchers. The surviving staff were reassigned, sworn to secrecy. But the tear in the barrier remained, Eleanor concluded. And now these entities from the Echo are trying to complete what was started. They've been trying for decades, Howard confirmed. Growing stronger, more focused. Learning to manipulate our world in subtle ways. Influencing people to find this place. Drawing them here. Drawing us here, Tessa whispered. We were chosen. The whispers from the walls suddenly increased in volume and intensity, as if responding to this realization. I could now distinctly hear my name being called by multiple voices, some familiar, others strange and distorted. Howard moved quickly to another cabinet, this one secured with multiple locks. We don't have much time. The neutralizing agent is failing faster than I anticipated. Your presence has accelerated the process exponentially. As he worked the locks, I became aware of a subtle change in the room's atmosphere. The air felt heavier, thicker somehow, and the electric lights had taken on a bluish tinge that made shadows seem deeper and more substantial. In those shadows, I could swear I saw movement, fleeting impressions of figures watching from the corners of the room. What's happening? Ryan asked, his voice tight with renewed fear. The membrane is thinning again, Howard replied without looking up from his task. The echo is pressing through. Don't look directly at the shadows. Don't acknowledge what you see in your peripheral vision. The final lock clicked open, and Howard swung the cabinet door wide to reveal a small safe. He quickly entered a combination, his fingers moving with practiced precision despite his obvious tension. After the incident, I made it my life's work to understand what happened here, he explained as he worked. I tracked down scattered research notes, interviewed surviving staff members, assembled a more complete picture than even Wayland had. I came to understand that the bell operates on principles far beyond conventional acoustics. It generates what might be called reality frequencies, sound waves that can physically alter the fabric of space-time. The safe opened with a soft hiss, revealing a velvet-lined interior containing what appeared to be small glass vials filled with silvery liquid, similar to what had rained down from the sprinklers but more concentrated. The neutralizing agent in concentrated form, Howard explained, carefully removing the vials and distributing them among us. If one of the entities attempts to make physical contact with you, break the vial. The liquid creates a temporary barrier they cannot cross. And how exactly do we get out of here? Eleanor asked, examining her vial with scientific curiosity despite the circumstances. Howard hesitated. That's the problem. The conventional exit is no longer viable. The closer we get to the surface, the stronger their influence becomes. They've been preparing for this moment for decades, establishing a kind of perimeter. So we're trapped? Liv's voice rose in panic. Not exactly, Howard replied. There's another way out. An emergency evacuation tunnel that connects to an old mine shaft about a mile east of here. It was designed as an escape route in case of catastrophic containment failure. Which is exactly what we're experiencing, I noted grimly. Howard nodded. The tunnel hasn't been maintained. It could be partially collapsed in sections. But it's our best chance. And after we escape? Tessa asked. What happens to this place? To the entities trying to break through? Howard's expression grew even more somber. If we escape, the resonance pattern will eventually dissipate temporarily. But they won't stop. They'll wait, gather strength, draw others here. The only permanent solution would be to destroy the bell itself, but that would require. He stopped abruptly, as if catching himself before revealing too much. Would require what? Eleanor pressed. Before Howard could answer, the lights flickered violently and the whispers rose to a near-deafening level. A deep, sonorous tone reverberated through the archives. The bell in the main chamber was resonating again, though no one was there to ring it. They're coming, Howard said urgently, moving to a bookshelf and pulling a specific volume halfway out. A hidden door swung open in the wall behind him, revealing a narrow passageway lit by emergency lighting. Through here. Quickly. We rushed toward the passage, but as I approached the hidden door, I felt a sudden resistance, as if the air itself had become semi-solid. The whispers coalesced into a single voice that seemed to speak directly into my mind. Marcus Webb. You are needed. The circle awaits completion. I tried to push through the invisible barrier, but it was like moving through molasses. Around me, the others seemed to be experiencing similar resistance, their movements slowing as if caught in a nightmare where running is impossible. Howard, already in the passage, turned back with alarm. They're trying to hold you here. Don't listen to the voices. Focus on moving forward. I strained against the unseen force, focusing all my while on placing one foot in front of the other. The voice in my head grew more insistent, more seductive. You've always sought knowledge beyond boundaries, Marcus. The echo contains all answers. All mysteries revealed. All loss restored. As it spoke, the air before me seemed to shimmer in part, revealing not the passage Howard had indicated but a different space altogether, a version of the archive room transformed, its walls transparent and revealing infinite other rooms beyond, stretching in all directions like a cosmic library. Within those rooms, figures moved, some human, others decidedly not. And standing directly before me, smiling with gentle understanding, was my grandfather, dead these 15 years but now seemingly solid and real, his hand extended in welcome. Don't be afraid, Marcus, he said in a voice I remembered from childhood. I've learned so much here. Let me show you. I felt tears spring to my eyes, my resolve weakening. Some distant part of my mind recognized this as manipulation, but the emotional pull was overwhelming. I reached toward his outstretched hand. Marcus, no! The shout came from both Howard and Tessa simultaneously. The shock of their voices broke the spell momentarily, allowing me to see that what appeared to be my grandfather was shifting and unstable when viewed directly, its features fluid, its eyes empty of true recognition. I stumbled backward, colliding with Tessa, who grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the hidden passage with surprising strength. That's not your grandfather, she said firmly. It's using your memories. As we struggled toward the doorway, I became aware that the others were facing similar temptations. Eleanor stood frozen, staring at what appeared to be a distinguished older man in academic robes. Ryan was reaching toward a shimmering doorway through which sophisticated technology unlike anything I'd ever seen gleamed tantalizingly. Liv was weeping, her hands partially extended toward what could only be the father she'd recognized earlier. They're showing you what you desire most, Howard called from the passage. Knowledge, reunion, understanding, whatever will make you hesitate. Don't engage. Push through. With monumental effort, I forced myself to look away from the thing wearing my grandfather's face and concentrated on the hidden doorway. Each step was a battle against both physical resistance and psychological manipulation. The voices in my head shifted tactics, moving from seduction to threats. Leave now and your name remains on these walls forever. Your fate is sealed regardless. Better to embrace it than flee. Finally, I crossed the threshold into the passage, the invisible resistance vanishing as soon as I passed through the doorway. Ryan and Eleanor had already made it through, while Tessa and I had to physically drag Liv away from her vision of her father. Howard quickly closed the hidden door behind us, cutting off the cacophony of whispers and leaving us in the relative quiet of the narrow concrete tunnel illuminated by dim emergency lighting. Don't think you're safe, Howard warned as we caught our breath. The echo isn't confined to that room or even this facility. It's established a presence throughout this entire area. And it knows where we're going. How is that possible? Eleanor demanded, her scientific skepticism reasserting itself despite what we just experienced. Because I've made this escape before, Howard admitted quietly. And they've been waiting 50 years for me to return. They've learned from each attempt, adapted, evolved. The echo exists partially outside linear time. It remembers futures that haven't happened yet. The implications of this statement hung in the air as we gathered ourselves for what promised to be an even more harrowing journey through the evacuation tunnel. The whispers had followed us, though muted now, a constant background murmur emanating from the very walls of the passage. And somewhere ahead in the darkness, something was waiting for us, something that had been waiting for decades, something that knew exactly where we were going and what we planned to do. Because it had seen us try to escape before. The evacuation tunnel stretched before us like the throat of some enormous beast, swallowing the weak beams of our flashlights into its depths. The emergency lighting was sporadic, functioning fixtures alternating with dark gaps where bulbs had failed decades ago. The air grew increasingly stale and damp as we moved away from the archives, suggesting that portions of the tunnel might have flooded or collapsed over the years. Stay close, Howard instructed, leading the way with the confidence of someone who had navigated this path before. The tunnel runs straight for about half a mile, then branches. We need to take the right fork, which leads to the mining complex. And the left fork? I couldn't help asking. Howard's expression darkened. An alternative research facility. We don't want to go there. We moved in silence for several minutes, the only sounds our footsteps on the concrete floor and the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. The whispers from the walls had subsided to an almost subliminal level, like the ocean heard from a great distance, but I could still feel their presence, a constant pressure at the edges of my consciousness. I don't understand something, Eleanor said finally, her academic mind still attempting to impose rational order on our experience. If this echo has been trying to break through for decades, why hasn't it succeeded before now? What's different about today? Howard maintained his pace as he answered, his voice low. The barrier has been degrading gradually since the 1965 incident. Like a dam developing hairline cracks. But a complete breach requires specific conditions, 13 souls in proximity to the bell, arranged in the same pattern Wayland used in the final experiment. But there are only 6 of us, Ryan pointed out. Yes, Howard agreed. But the echo isn't constrained by physical bodies as we understand them. The 12 subjects who died in the original experiment, their consciousnesses were trapped in the echo while their bodies remained here. And Wayland himself exists in some intermediate state, neither fully in our world nor fully in the echo. A chill ran down my spine as I processed the implications. So they're trying to use us to complete the circle? To take Wayland's place? No, Howard corrected. To take all their places. A complete reset of the ritual with new subjects, new souls to sacrifice to the breach. Tessa, who had been quiet since our escape from the archives, suddenly spoke up. The writing on the walls, our names repeated over and over. Those weren't just threats or attempts to frighten us. They were practicing, learning to call us specifically. Howard nodded grimly. The echo has been refining its focus for decades. In the early years after the incident, it could only produce general whispers, fragments of speech. Over time, it learned to form coherent sentences, then to mimic specific voices. Now it can create convincing simulacra of people from your memories, custom tailored to each of you. But why us? Liv asked, her voice strained. Out of all the people who could have found this place, why were we the ones drawn here? Howard hesitated before answering. The echo doesn't select randomly. It's attracted to certain psychological profiles. People with specific types of sensitivity or receptivity. People who, for lack of a better term, already have one foot in other worlds. What does that mean? Eleanor demanded. It means, Howard said carefully, that each of you likely has some history with liminal experiences. Moments where realities seem to slip. Encounters with things that shouldn't exist. Prophetic dreams. Near-death experiences. The echo recognizes its own. An uncomfortable silence fell as we each presumably reflected on our own histories. I thought about the recurring dream I had since childhood, standing in a vast library where all the books were written in languages I couldn't read, while something massive moved just out of sight between the shelves. I'd never mentioned it to anyone, dismissing it as a mere quirk of my subconscious. But now, does anyone else hear that? Ryan suddenly asked, stopping in his tracks. We all halted, straining to hear whatever had caught his attention. At first, I detected nothing beyond the ambient sounds of the tunnel. Then, very faintly, I heard it, a rhythmic tapping, like metal on concrete, coming from somewhere ahead of us. Howard immediately extinguished his flashlight. Lights off, he whispered urgently. Now. We complied, plunging the tunnel into near total darkness. Only the dim glow of a distant emergency light provided any illumination, casting everything in a faint reddish hue. The tapping continued, growing incrementally louder, clearly approaching rather than receding. What is it? Tessa whispered, her voice barely audible. Now what? Who? Howard replied, his voice equally low. Dr. Harriet Schaefer. She was Wayland's chief assistant. She was outside the chamber when the final experiment occurred, but she was heavily exposed to the bell's resonance during prior tests. She's still alive? Eleanor asked incredulously. Not exactly, Howard replied. She never left the facility. After the incident, she became something else. Neither fully human nor fully echo. She wanders the tunnels, trapped between worlds. The tapping was now distinct enough that I could identify its source, a metal object striking the concrete floor in a deliberate pattern. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. She's blind, Howard continued. The resonance burned out her optic nerves. She navigates by sound and by her connection to the echo. She can sense living consciousness, but not if we remain absolutely still and quiet. We froze, barely daring to breathe as the tapping grew louder. From the darkness ahead, a figure gradually emerged into the faint red glow of the emergency light, a woman, or what had once been a woman. She was tall and gaunt, dressed in the tatters of what might have been a lab coat. Her hair was wild and matted, hanging down past her waist. But it was her face that seized my attention and held it in horror. Where her eyes should have been were only empty sockets, scarred and blackened as if by intense heat. In her right hand, she carried what appeared to be a metal pipe, which she tapped methodically against the floor as she advanced. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. As she came closer, I could see that her skin had a strange, translucent quality, especially around her extremities. Her fingers appeared almost crystalline, refracting the dim red light. Most disturbing of all was the constant, subtle flicker of her entire form, as if she were a television image with poor reception, momentarily phasing in and out of complete physical manifestation. "Don't move," Howard breathed, the words barely a whisper. "She'll pass us by if we remain perfectly still." Dr. Schaefer stopped about 20 feet away, her head cocked to one side in an unsettlingly bird-like motion. She tapped her pipe against the floor once, then twice, then fell silent, listening. I held my breath, feeling my heart hammering so loudly in my chest that I was certain she must hear it. After what seemed an eternity, she resumed her tapping and continued forward, moving with an unnatural gait, as if her joints functioned differently than human anatomy should allow. As she drew level with our group, I could see her lips moving rapidly, silently forming words in a ceaseless monologue. Just as it seemed she would pass us by without incident, Liz's backpack, which she had set down at her feet, slipped and fell onto its side with a soft thud. Dr. Schaefer froze instantly, her head snapping toward the sound with predatory speed. Her lipless mouth opened in what might have been a smile, revealing teeth that glinted metallically in the dim light. "Visitors," she said, her voice a horrible rasp, like sandpaper on glass. New voices for the choir. She turned fully toward us, raising her pipe not as a navigational tool now but as a weapon. "Run!" Howard shouted, abandoning stealth. We scattered, flashlights coming back on, beams dancing wildly across the tunnel walls as we fled. I found myself running alongside Tessa, with Eleanor just ahead. Behind us, I heard the metallic clang of Schaefer's pipe striking something, or someone, followed by Ryan's cry of pain. I skidded to a halt, turning back to see Ryan sprawled on the ground, Schaefer standing over him, pipe raised for another blow. Without thinking, I reached into my pocket for the vial Howard had given me, sprinted back, and smashed it directly against Schaefer's arm as she brought the pipe down. The effect was instantaneous. Where the silvery liquid contacted her semi-transparent flesh, it sizzled and smoked. Schaefer recoiled with an unearthly shriek that seemed to contain multiple voices screaming in unison. Her form flickered violently, becoming momentarily so transparent that I could see the tunnel wall through her torso. I grabbed Ryan's arm, hauling him to his feet. Blood streamed from a gash on his forehead, but he was conscious and able to move. "Go!" Howard bellowed from further down the tunnel, where he was physically dragging Liv away from the confrontation. We ran, Schaefer's multi-voice shrieking pursuing us, echoing off the concrete walls and seeming to come from all directions at once. The tunnel ahead forked exactly as Howard had described. We veered right without hesitation, following Eleanor and Tessa, who had already made the turn. The new passage was narrower and rougher than the main tunnel, with exposed pipes running along the ceiling and walls. The emergency lighting was even more sporadic here, plunging us into near total darkness between functioning fixtures. "Is everyone here?" Howard called back once we'd put some distance between ourselves and the junction. "All present," Eleanor confirmed, her clinical detachment wearing thin at the edges. "Is she following us?" Liv asked, glancing nervously over her shoulder. Howard shook his head. "Schaefer rarely ventures beyond the main tunnel. She's bound to the primary resonance field generated by the bell. But she'll alert the others." "Others?" I asked, helping Ryan staunch the blood from his head wound with a bandana from my pocket. "Other Echo-touched," Howard explained grimly. "Former researchers or subjects who, like Schaefer, exist in an intermediate state. They serve as extensions of the Echo's influence." "How many are there?" Tessa asked. "At least 7 that I've encountered over the years. Possibly more by now." We continued moving, our pace slower due to Ryan's injury and the increasingly treacherous nature of the tunnel. In some sections, the concrete floor had cracked and buckled, while in others, partial cave-ins had left piles of debris that we had to climb over or squeeze past. The mining complex should be about a quarter-mile ahead, Howard informed us. "Once we reach it, we'll have multiple potential exit routes to the surface." "And then what?" I asked, the question that had been building in my mind finally finding voice. "Even if we escape, what happens to this place? To the Echo? You said yourself they'll keep drawing people here, keep trying to complete the ritual." Howard was silent for a long moment before responding. "There's a way to end it permanently. To destroy the bell and seal the breach in the barrier. But it would require..." "Require what?" Eleanor pressed when he trailed off. "A countersong," Howard said finally. "A resonance pattern precisely calibrated to cancel out the bell's frequency. It would collapse the bridge between worlds, force the Echo entities back to their own dimension, and prevent them from breaking through again." "That sounds like exactly what we need," Liv said. "Why haven't you done it before now?" Howard's face was grim in the dim light. "Because generating the countersong requires human consciousness as a conduit. Someone would need to connect directly to the bell while the resonance is at its peak. They would serve as a focal point for the counter frequency. The implications hung in the air between us." "And what happens to this person?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Their consciousness would be used to seal the breach," Howard said softly. "They would be annihilated, body and mind, in the process." "Sacrifice," Eleanor murmured. "Just like the original experiment, but in reverse." "Yes," Howard acknowledged. "A willing sacrifice. I've spent decades calculating the exact resonance pattern needed, designing a device that could generate it. But I could never..." He looked away. "I could never bring myself to be the one." "So you've been maintaining this place all these years," Tessa said, realization dawning in her voice. "Not just studying it or guarding it. You've been waiting for someone who would make the sacrifice who couldn't." Howard didn't respond, but his silence was confirmation enough. Before we could process this disturbing revelation, a low rumble shook the tunnel. Dust and small fragments of concrete rained down from the ceiling. "What was that?" Liv asked, alarmed. "They're destabilizing the tunnel structure," Howard said urgently. "We need to move faster." We broke into a jog, ignoring the hazards of the uneven floor. The rumbling continued, growing in intensity. Larger chunks of concrete began to fall around us. The mining complex is just ahead, Howard called back. Once we're there. His words were cut off by a deafening crash as a section of the ceiling collapsed entirely about 50 feet ahead of us, completely blocking the tunnel. No! Howard rushed forward, examining the cave-in with his flashlight. We can't get through this way. Is there another route? Eleanor asked, maintaining her composure remarkably well despite the circumstances. Howard hesitated. There's only one alternative now. We need to go back to the junction and take the left fork. But you said that led to another research facility, I reminded him. That we didn't want to go there. We don't, he confirmed grimly. But it's our only option now. The facility has its own exit to the surface, an elevator shaft that bypasses the main complex. What's in this other facility that's so dangerous? Ryan asked, wincing as Tessa helped him tighten the makeshift bandage around his head. Howard's expression was haunted. It's where they kept the survivors of the early experiments. The ones who were changed by exposure to the bell's resonance. The ones who couldn't be returned to society. Like Schaefer? Liv asked. Worse than Schaefer, Howard replied. Much worse. Another rumble shook the tunnel, more violent than before. A crack raced along the ceiling above us, widening visibly as we watched. We don't have a choice, Eleanor decided, assuming leadership as the academic authority in the group. We need to move now or be buried here. Howard nodded reluctantly and led us back the way we had come, our flashlight beams cutting through the dust-filled air. The main tunnel was still clear when we reached the junction, though I could hear distant metallic tapping, Schaefer, patrolling somewhere in the darkness. We turned left this time, entering a passage that appeared better maintained than the one we had just fled. The emergency lighting was functional here, casting a steady, eerie red glow along the corridor. The walls were lined with pipes and conduits, some of which emitted a soft hum of active machinery. This section is still powered, Howard explained in a low voice. They never fully decommissioned it, just sealed it off from the main facility. Who's they? I asked. A division of the Department of Defense without a name, Howard replied. The ones who funded Wayland's research and then buried it when it went wrong. They maintained minimal monitoring of this wing until the late 80s, then automated what they could and abandoned the rest. The corridor ended at a heavy steel door marked restricted area, authorized personnel only. Next to it was a keypad, its plastic yellowed with age. Howard approached it confidently. The code was never changed, he explained, entering a sequence of numbers. The keypad beeped in acknowledgement, and the door unlocked with an audible clank of heavy bolts retracting. Howard pushed it open, revealing a stark white corridor beyond. Unlike the utilitarian concrete of the tunnels we traversed, this space had the antiseptic appearance of a medical facility, white tile floors, fluorescent lighting recessed in dropped ceilings, doors with small observation windows lining both sides. This is the Echo Exposure Quarantine Wing, Howard said as we stepped through. The official designation for what was essentially a holding pen for human test subjects who survived prolonged exposure to the bell's resonance. They kept people imprisoned here? Tessa asked, horror evident in her voice. Not people, exactly. Not anymore. Howard's voice was tight. By the time subjects were transferred here, they were already something else. Physically and mentally transformed by the Echo's influence. The corridor stretched ahead, eerily silent and spotlessly clean despite decades of abandonment. The doors on either side each had a number painted on them, along with electronic status panels that were dark and inactive. Are they still here? Liv asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Howard gestured to the status panels. Life support systems failed decades ago. Any conventional human subjects would have died from dehydration within days. But you said they weren't conventional humans anymore, Ryan pointed out. No, Howard acknowledged. They weren't. Which is why we need to move quickly and quietly. The echo persists in this wing more strongly than anywhere else in the facility. The subjects may be gone in body, but in other ways. He trailed off, then added quietly, they never left. As if on cue, the fluorescent lights flickered, and a soft whispering sound emanated from behind one of the doors we were passing. I couldn't make out words, but the cadence was unmistakably that of human speech, or something approximating it. Don't stop, Howard instructed. Don't look through the observation windows. Focus on the end of the corridor. We moved forward, maintaining a brisk pace without quite breaking into a run. The whispers followed us, growing in volume and spreading from door to door like a contagion. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, fighting the urge to glance at the observation windows. Tessa, walking beside me, was not so disciplined. From the corner of my eye, I saw her head turn toward one of the doors as we passed it. She stopped abruptly with a choked gasp. Oh my God! Despite Howard's warning, I turned to look at what had halted her. Through the small window in the door marked Subject 17, I could see a hospital room, pristine and undisturbed. A bed with restraints, monitoring equipment, and sitting on the edge of the bed, looking directly at us through the glass, was a perfect duplicate of Tessa herself. The doppelganger smiled, a horrible, stretched expression that no human face should be capable of making. Its eyes were entirely black, without whites or pupils, and its skin had the same semi-transparent quality we'd observed in Schaefer. Don't look at it, Howard urged, grabbing Tessa's arm. It's not real, just an echo projection trying to establish a connection. But Tessa seemed transfixed, unable to tear her gaze away from her mirror image. The thing behind the glass raised its hand, pressing its palm against the window. The glass began to frost over from the contact, ice crystals spreading rapidly across its surface. Tessa! I shouted, breaking her trance. She blinked and backed away just as the glass shattered, exploding outward in a spray of crystalline shards. The doppelganger's arm extended through the broken window, impossibly long and distorted, fingers elongating like tentacles reaching for Tessa's face. I yanked her backward as Howard pulled the last vial of silver liquid from his pocket and flung it directly at the stretching appendage. The glass shattered against the unnatural limb, and the effect was immediate. The arm recoiled with a high-pitched keening sound, retreating back into the room. But the damage was done. All along the corridor, the observation windows began to crack, wood-like fissures spreading across the glass as the whispering rose to a deafening cacophony. Behind each pane, shadowy figures pressed forward, some appearing as duplicates of our group, others as misshapen approximations of human form, still others as nothing recognizable at all. Run! Howard shouted, abandoning all pretense of stealth. To the end of the corridor, the elevator shaft is through the double doors. We sprinted down the hallway as glass shattered behind us, the sound of bare feet slapping against tile in relentless pursuit. I risked a glance back and immediately wished I hadn't. The corridor was filling with semi-transparent figures, some crawling along the walls and ceiling like insects, others flowing forward in a motion more liquid than bipedal. Eleanor reached the double doors first, slamming her body against the push bar. The doors swung open to reveal a small antechamber with an elevator at the far end. We rushed inside, Howard bringing up the rear. The controls are fried, he said, gesturing to the elevator's dark and call button. But the maintenance ladder is intact. It's a 200-foot climb to the surface. He moved to a panel beside the elevator and wrenched it open, revealing a narrow access shaft with metal rungs embedded in the concrete wall. The shaft extended upward into darkness, the faint glow of daylight barely visible at the very top. Quickly, Howard urged. I'll go last. I need to seal the doors. One by one, we entered the shaft and began to climb, first Eleanor, then Liv, Ryan with his injured head, Tessa, and myself. Howard remained in the antechamber, pulling something from his pack, what looked like small explosive charges that he began placing around the doorframe. As I climbed, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. The double doors shuddered under impact from the other side, the metal beginning to deform as if being pressed by enormous force. Howard worked frantically, his hands steady despite the imminent danger. Howard, come on. I called down. He looked up, meeting my eyes with a strange calm. There's something I need to tell you, Marcus. Something I should have said from the beginning. The doors buckled further, fingertip-shaped indentations appearing in the metal as if it were clay. There's no time. I shouted. Make time, Howard replied, his voice firm. Because what I'm about to tell you changes everything. He finished setting the charges and stepped into the shaft, beginning his climb but stopping just below me on the ladder. The bell cannot be destroyed from the outside, he said, his eyes locked on mine. The countersong must be generated at the source, in the main chamber, with the bell at full resonance. You've said that already, I replied impatiently, aware of the others climbing steadily above us and the sounds of the door finally giving way below. What I didn't say, Howard continued, is why I brought you here specifically, Marcus. Why I reached out to you after all these years. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the damp air of the shaft. What are you talking about? We found this place by accident. Howard shook his head. Nothing about the Echo is accidental. It draws those it needs, those with the right attunement. Just as Wayland gathered his 13 subjects 50 years ago. The first of the Echo entities breached the antechamber, a twisted figure that moved in jerky, non-Euclidean angles. Howard pulled a remote detonator from his pocket. Your grandfather wasn't just my colleague, Marcus. He was Subject Zero, the first to make contact with the Echo, the template for all that followed. And that connection, it passed to you. He pressed the button on the detonator. The charges exploded with a deafening roar, collapsing the entrance to the shaft in a cloud of dust and debris. The pursuing entities were temporarily blocked, though I could already hear them scratching at the rubble. Climb, Howard shouted to the others above us. Then, more quietly to me, the Echo showed you your grandfather because that connection is real. You are the only one who can generate the countersong. The only one whose consciousness is attuned to the proper frequency. You're saying I'm meant to sacrifice myself? I asked incredulously. That this whole expedition was a setup to get me here? Not a setup, Howard corrected, resuming his climb. A possibility. A chance to end this permanently. But the choice must be yours, freely given or not at all. We climbed in silence after that, each lost in our own thoughts. The shaft grew lighter as we ascended, the promise of daylight spurring us onward despite exhaustion. The sounds of pursuit faded below, replaced by the rhythmic clanking of our hands and feet on the metal rungs. Finally, Eleanor reached the top and pushed open a heavy metal hatch. Sunlight flooded the shaft, momentarily blinding after hours in the dimness below. One by one, we emerged onto the surface, a wooded area, overgrown and wild, with the crumbling remains of mining equipment scattered about. "Where are we?" Liv asked, squinting in the afternoon light. "About 3 miles east of the research facility," Howard answered, the last to emerge. He sealed the hatch behind us and began covering it with branches and leaves. "An abandoned iron mine that the government purchased as a cover for the deeper excavation of the research complex." "So we're safe?" Ryan asked, touching the makeshift bandage on his head. Howard straightened up, his expression somber. "Temporarily. But the echo isn't contained anymore. The breach is widening. Those entities we encountered, they were just the advance guard, the weakest of what waits on the other side." "What happens now?" Tessa asked, her voice steady despite the lingering shock of seeing her doppelganger. All eyes turned to me. I felt the weight of their gazes, particularly Howard's, with its terrible knowledge and unspoken question. "You don't have to do this," Eleanor said quietly, somehow intuiting what had passed between Howard and me in the shaft. "Whatever he's told you, whatever he believes you're capable of, it's not your responsibility." "But it is," I replied, the certainty growing in me with each passing moment. Not because Howard manipulated me into coming here. Not because of my grandfather. But because I've seen what's coming, what's already breaking through, and I can't walk away knowing I could have stopped it. Howard reached into his pack and retrieved a small metal device about the size of a cell phone. "This is the resonator," he explained. "It's calibrated to generate the initial countersong frequency, but it needs to be amplified through human consciousness to reach the necessary power. To reach the bell, we'd have to go back through the facility," Tessa pointed out. "Through everything we just escaped." "There's another way," Howard said. "A maintenance shaft that leads directly to the central chamber. It's how I've been accessing the facility all these years without triggering the Echo's defenses." "And you're just mentioning this now?" Liv asked incredulously. "Because it's not an escape route," Howard replied. "It only goes in one direction. There's no coming back that way." I took the resonator from Howard, examining it closely. The device was deceptively simple, a frequency generator with a single button and what looked like neural interfaces designed to make contact with the user's temples. "How does it work?" I asked. "The resonator establishes the base counter frequency," Howard explained. "When placed in proximity to the bell, it creates a feedback loop. The wearer serves as a conduit, a living amplifier for the signal. Their consciousness, their very self, becomes the medium through which the countersong propagates, canceling out the bell's resonance and sealing the breach. And in the process, this person is destroyed," Eleanor stated flatly. Howard didn't deny it. "Consciousness is energy. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. The wearer's consciousness doesn't cease to exist, it becomes the seal itself." "So I wouldn't die," I said softly. "I'd become something else." "Yes," Howard confirmed. "A permanent guardian at the boundary between worlds." The implications were staggering. Not death, but eternal vigilance, a consciousness stretched across the barrier between dimensions, forever holding back the Echo. "There has to be another way," Tessa insisted, taking my hand. "We can alert the authorities, get help." "There is no help," Howard interrupted gently. "The government agencies that once oversaw this project have been disbanded or reorganized beyond recognition. The few who remember what happened here have spent decades ensuring it remains buried. By the time anyone could mount an effective response, the breach would be complete." I looked at each of them, Ryan, pale from blood loss but still standing, Liv, her eyes haunted by the vision of her father, Eleanor, her scientific skepticism finally overwhelmed by irrefutable experience, Tessa, whose strength had kept me moving forward when I might have surrendered to the echo's temptations, and Howard, who had carried this burden alone for 50 years. "I need some time," I said finally. "Not much, just enough to think clearly." Howard nodded understanding. "We should move away from the mine entrance anyway. There's an old caretaker's cabin about half a mile from here. We can rest there while you decide." As we made our way through the woods, I found myself walking beside Tessa. She had been quiet since her encounter with the doppelganger, her usual incisive questions replaced by thoughtful silence. "What did you see?" I asked finally. "When you looked through that window, what did you really see?" She hesitated before answering. "It wasn't just my double. It was a version of me that had embraced something terrible. A version that had given into thoughts and impulses I've always kept contained. It knew things about me that no one else could possibly know." "The echo reads minds," I suggested. "No," she replied firmly. "It doesn't read minds. It reads possibilities. It shows you the paths not taken, the versions of yourself that exist in potential." She looked at me directly. "That's why Howard believes you're the one who can seal the breach. Because in some potential reality, you already have." The caretaker's cabin was small but surprisingly intact, a one-room structure with basic furniture and a wood stove. Howard quickly got fire going while the others tended to Ryan's wound and took inventory of our remaining supplies. I stepped outside, needing space to think. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the trees. From here, there was no sign of the horror we had just escaped, no indication that beneath these peaceful woods lay a tear in the fabric of reality itself. Howard joined me after a few minutes, offering a bottle of water. "You don't have much time to decide," he said quietly. "The breach is accelerating. By tomorrow morning, it may be too late." "Why me?" I asked, the question that had been burning in my mind since his revelation in the shaft. "What makes me so special?" "Your grandfather was the first to make contact with the echo," Howard explained. "In 1962, 3 years before the incident with the bell. He had a natural sensitivity to certain frequencies, what some might call a psychic gift. Wayland recognized it and recruited him specifically because of it." "And you think I inherited this sensitivity?" Howard nodded. "The echo recognized you instantly. That's why it manifested your grandfather so clearly, so specifically. The connection is in your very DNA." I took a long drink of water, weighing his words. "If I do this, if I use the resonator and become this seal, what happens to the others? To you?" "If you succeed, everyone escapes," Howard said simply. "The echo entities would be forced back to their own dimension. The breach would close. This place would become just another abandoned government facility, its secrets buried forever. And if I fail?" Howard's expression darkened. "Then the breach widens exponentially. The echo entities cross over en masse. They begin replacing reality with their own version, a world where the laws of physics as we understand them no longer apply, where human consciousness becomes just another resource to be harvested." The magnitude of the choice before me was overwhelming. I stared out at the darkening forest, trying to find clarity. "There's one more thing you should know," Howard said hesitantly. "About your grandfather." I turned to face him. "What?" "He didn't die in 1965 as you were told." "Not exactly. When the Bell experiment failed catastrophically, 13 subjects were physically killed, but your grandfather wasn't among them. He was elsewhere at the time, monitoring the experiment remotely. So what happened to him? The disaster affected him differently. He became unstable, shifting between our reality and the echo. Sometimes physically present, sometimes not. Eventually, the government declared him dead for official purposes, but the truth is more complicated. Howard paused, his expression troubled. I've seen him, Marcus. Over the years. Glimpses. He exists in both worlds simultaneously, suffering in neither, but never fully present in either. Are you saying he's still out there? Some version of him? I'm saying that what the echo showed you wasn't entirely a deception. The consciousness that was your grandfather persists. And if you choose to become the seal, you might find him waiting for you. A guide in the in-between. I absorbed this in silence, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Finally, I asked the question that would determine everything. If not me, then who? If I walk away, who else could do this? Howard's answer was honest but devastating. No one, in all likelihood. Not in time. I've spent 50 years searching for someone with the right attunement. The echo chose you, Marcus. It called to you specifically because you can succeed where others would fail. Inside the cabin, I could see the others through the window, Tess attending to Ryan's wound, Liv and Eleanor inventorying supplies. People who had been strangers to me days ago but who now depended on my decision. I'll do it, I said finally, the words feeling right as they left my mouth. But I need to tell them myself. Howard nodded, a mixture of relief and regret in his eyes. We should leave at first light. The maintenance shaft entrance is hidden about a mile from here. When I re-entered the cabin, the conversation stopped abruptly. They all looked at me, understanding that a decision had been reached. I explained what Howard had told me about my grandfather, about the nature of the seal, about the choice I had made. Eleanor reacted first, her academic detachment finally crumbling. This is insanity, she insisted. We have no proof that Howard's device will work as he claims. This could be an elaborate suicide for nothing. I've seen the echo, I countered quietly. We all have. We know what's coming if the breach isn't sealed. But why does it have to be you? Liv asked, tears in her eyes. I had no answer that would satisfy them or myself, really. Only the certainty that if not me, then no one. That night, as the others slept fitfully, Tessa sat with me by the dying fire. We spoke in hushed tones about our lives before this nightmare, about the books we loved, the places we traveled, the futures we had imagined for ourselves. Normal things, human things, a conversation between two people who might have had years to know each other but were granted only hours. I'll go with you, she said as dawn approached. As far as I can. No, I replied gently. Howard said the maintenance shaft. Not into the shaft, she clarified. Just to the entrance. I want to. I need to say goodbye properly. I couldn't deny her that, nor did I want to. The thought of facing those final moments alone was more terrifying than the fate that awaited me. Morning came too quickly. We gathered our few remaining supplies and set out through the woods, Howard leading the way. The forest was unnaturally quiet, no birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. As if all living things had fled from the rawness emanating from beneath the earth. The maintenance shaft entrance was concealed beneath a natural rock formation about a mile from the cabin. Howard moved with practiced efficiency, finding handholds invisible to the rest of us and shifting a large boulder to reveal a narrow passage descending into darkness. The shaft leads directly to an access panel in the ceiling of the main chamber, Howard explained, handing me a flashlight and a resonator device. The journey down takes about 20 minutes. The panel is designed to be opened from above. Just pull the red lever when you reach it. I nodded, securing the resonator in my pocket. And once I'm in the chamber, go directly to the bell. Place the resonator against it. There's a magnetic attachment that will hold it in place. Then position the neural interfaces at your temples and press the activation button. The rest. He hesitated. The rest will happen automatically. Will it hurt? The question slipped out before I could stop it, a suddenly childlike fear in the face of the unknown. Howard's expression softened. I don't know, he admitted. But I don't believe so. From what I understand, the transition is instantaneous. One moment you'll be yourself, the next you'll be everywhere. I turned to the others to say my goodbyes. Ryan clasped my hand firmly, words failing him. Eleanor embraced me awkwardly, her scientific mind still rebelling against what was happening but her human heart understanding the sacrifice. Liv hugged me tightly, whispering thank you against my shoulder. Then it was Tessa's turn. She took my face in her hands, looking directly into my eyes. In another life, she said softly, we would have had time. In another life, I agreed, my throat tight with emotion. She kissed me then, a brief, fierce promise of what might have been. When she pulled away, I saw in her eyes a determination that matched my own. Finish this, she said. End it for all of us. I nodded, unable to speak. Then I turned to Howard, who stood beside the shaft entrance. You've carried this burden long enough, I told him. It's my turn now. He gripped my shoulder tightly. Your grandfather would be proud, he said, his voice rough with emotion. With a final look at the group, this unlikely family forged in terror and courage, I entered the shaft and began my descent into darkness. Behind me, I heard Howard sealing the entrance, ensuring no echo entities could follow the same path. The journey down was strangely peaceful. The narrow shaft was dry and stable, unlike the deteriorating tunnels we had navigated earlier. My flashlight illuminated smooth concrete walls marked at regular intervals with maintenance symbols and depth indicators. As I descended deeper, I felt a curious calm settling over me, not resignation but acceptance of what lay ahead. The whispering started about halfway down, faint at first, then growing steadily louder as I approached the bottom. But unlike before, the voices didn't seem threatening now. There was almost a note of anticipation in them, of expectation. I reached the access panel exactly as Howard had described, a metal hatch with a red lever handle. Before opening it, I paused to gather myself, to prepare for what would come next. I thought of my life before this moment, of books read and unread, of friendships formed and lost, of all the ordinary miracles that constitute a human existence. I thought of my grandfather, wondering if Howard was right, if some version of him awaited me in the in-between. Then I pulled the lever. The panel opened silently, allowing me to lower myself into the main chamber of Echo Research Facility. The space was vast and circular, its walls lined with monitoring equipment long since fallen silent. In the center stood the bell, a massive structure of gleaming metal that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the light from my flashlight. Unlike traditional bells, it had no clapper. Its surface was etched with intricate symbols that seemed to shift and change as I approached, as if they were living things rather than engravings. The whispering was a physical presence now, pressing against my skin like static electricity. As I moved toward the bell, I became aware of figures at the periphery of my vision, translucent forms that watched my approach with infinite patience. The 13 subjects of Wayland's original experiment, perhaps, were aspects of the echo itself manifesting to witness this moment. I reached the bell and placed my hand against its surface. It was cold, unnaturally so, yet it vibrated subtly under my touch, as if resonating to my very presence. I removed the resonator from my pocket and, as Howard had instructed, attached it to the bell's surface where it held fast. Taking a deep breath, I positioned the neural interfaces at my temples. They adhered automatically, conforming to the contours of my skull. All that remained was to press the activation button. In that final moment, as my finger hovered over the button, the whispers coalesced into a single voice, my grandfather's voice, clear and unmistakable. The circle closes. The pattern completes. I pressed the button. Light exploded outward from the resonator, not the harsh artificial glare of electricity but something more fundamental, as if reality itself were being illuminated from within. The light engulfed me, flowing through the neural interfaces into my consciousness. I felt myself expanding, dissolving, becoming something other than human, a pattern of energy spreading outward to encompass the bell, the chamber, the entire facility. In that expansion, I understood everything, the nature of the echo, the purpose of Wayland's experiments, the true horror of what he had unleashed and what Howard had spent decades attempting to contain. I saw the breach in the barrier between worlds not as a tear but as a mutation, a cancer in reality itself that had been growing slowly but inexorably since that first experiment in 1965. And I saw how to heal it. My consciousness stretched across the boundary, finding the exact frequency that would counter the bell's resonance. The whispers rose to a crescendo, then began to fade as the entities of the echo withdrew, forced back to their own dimension by the countersong I had become. The last thing I perceived as Marcus Webb was a figure standing before me, an elderly man with kind eyes and a familiar smile. My grandfather, exactly as I remembered him from childhood, but somehow more substantial, more present than even my memories of him had been. "Well done," he said, extending his hand to me. "Now we guard the threshold together." I took his hand, and Marcus Webb ceased to exist. Tess and I stood outside the sealed entrance to the maintenance shaft, waiting. The minutes stretched into hours, the morning sun climbing higher in the sky. No one spoke much. What was there to say in the face of such sacrifice? Howard watched the forest with vigilant eyes, alert for any sign of echo entities. Ryan dozed fitfully, his head wound making him feverish despite Eleanor's careful tending. Liv simply stared at the sealed entrance, tears streaming silently down her face. When it happened, they all felt it simultaneously, a wave of something passing through them, through the very air around them. Not a sound but a cessation of sound, as if a background noise they had grown so accustomed to that they no longer consciously registered it had suddenly stopped. Howard straightened, his expression one of wonder and disbelief. "He did it," he whispered. "The breach is sealed." "How can you tell?" Eleanor asked, Eva the scientist. "Because for the first time in 50 years, Howard replied, tears welling in his eyes, "I don't hear the whispers anymore." As if in confirmation, the forest around them suddenly erupted with normal sounds, birds calling, leaves rustling in the breeze, the distant chatter of squirrels. Life returning to a place that had been shrouded in unnatural silence. Tessa placed her hand against the rock that concealed the entrance to the shaft, knowing that what lay beneath was now forever changed. The man she had begun to care for was gone, transformed into something beyond human understanding. A guardian at the threshold between worlds. "What happens now?" Liv asked softly. Howard sighed, the weight of decades finally lifting from his shoulders. "We leave this place." We tell no one what happened here. Who would believe us? We go back to our lives, carrying the knowledge of what was saved and what was sacrificed. And the facility? Eleanor pressed. The bell? Will remain sealed and silent, Howard assured her. The countersong will persist as long as Marcus does. And how long is that? Tessa asked. Howard had no answer for her. None of them did. The nature of what Marcus had become was beyond their comprehension, a consciousness stretched across dimensions, existing outside conventional time. As they gathered their belongings and prepared to hike back to civilization, Tessa lingered for a moment longer at the sealed entrance. She pressed her forehead against the cool stone and whispered words meant only for one who might or might not still be capable of hearing them. In another life, we would have had time. And deep below, in a chamber now filled with silence where a bell once rang, something that had once been Marcus Webb heard her. Not with human ears, but with a consciousness that now permeated the very boundary between worlds. And though he could not answer in any way she would perceive, he carried her words with him into his eternal vigilance, a reminder of the humanity he had sacrificed and the world he had saved. The circle was complete. The pattern was sealed. The echo, at last, was silent. What remains of a man when his mind begins to leak? The Antarctic wind howled across the barren landscape, its piercing cry seeking entrance through every crack and seam of Outpost Theta. I pulled my thermal jacket tighter around my shoulders, a futile gesture against the creeping cold that seemed to bypass fabric entirely and settle directly into bone. 48 days since I'd arrived at this remote research station, and I still couldn't acclimate to the perpetual chill. Sheriff Harmon? You still with us? Dr. Reynolds tapped her pen against her notepad, the rhythmic sound pulling me back to the cramped common room where 5 other researchers pretended not to eavesdrop on our conversation. Former sheriff, I corrected, running a weathered hand across 3 days of stubble. Been retired 5 years now. Just call me Jack. Reynolds, Eliza, according to her name tag, offered a clinical smile. Jack, then. You were describing your experience in the Eastern Cavern Complex. I nodded, trying to organize thoughts that felt increasingly slippery. At 63, I'd spent 30 years upholding the law in a small Montana town where the worst crimes involved drunk driving or the occasional domestic dispute. Nothing had prepared me for what awaited in those ice caves. Like I said, I was following protocol. Daily inspection of the perimeter sensors, checking for equipment failures. I've done it a dozen times since arriving. I paused, reaching for my coffee mug. The liquid inside had already gone cold, but I drank it anyway. The entrance to the cave network wasn't on any of the station maps. Just a narrow fissure in the glacier that I might have missed if not for the sound. What kind of sound? Reynolds leaned forward, her scientific detachment momentarily replaced by genuine curiosity. Water, I said, though the word felt insufficient. Running water. Which makes no sense in this environment, especially not in an unexplored ice cave. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, a brief interruption that sent shadows dancing across the metal walls. For a moment, I could have sworn those shadows moved independently, stretching toward me with elongated fingers before retreating as the light stabilized. And you entered this cave alone? Without notifying anyone? There was no judgment in her voice, just a methodical collection of facts. 25 years as a sheriff teaches you to investigate anomalies, I replied, defensive despite myself. Besides, I had my radio. Signal was clear until I reached the chamber with the pool. Reynolds made a note. Describe this pool. I closed my eyes, immediately regretting it as the image solidified behind my eyelids, a perfectly circular basin carved into ancient rock, filled with liquids so black it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Around its perimeter, strange petroglyphs covered the stone walls, not the crude markings of primitive humans, but intricate, mathematical patterns that hurt to look at directly. Not a natural formation, I said finally, opening my eyes to banish the memory. Water was still, but not frozen, despite the temperature. No visible inflow or outflow, yet when I stood beside it, I could hear movement, like a river rushing beneath the surface. Something scraped against the metal exterior of the outpost, probably just ice shifting in the wind, but every head in the common room turned toward the sound. And that's when you experience the hallucination? Reynolds prompted. It wasn't a hallucination. My voice came out sharper than intended. I know what I saw. When I looked into that pool, it showed me things. My hometown. My daughter's graduation. My wife's funeral. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Everyone knew about Maria's death, the cancer that took her 3 years ago, the real reason I'd accepted this godforsaken assignment. Antarctica had seemed far enough away to outrun grief. The surface changed, I continued, quieter now, like watching a movie projected onto water. Perfect clarity. And then, I trailed off, remembering the sudden shift, how the familiar scenes had distorted, revealing versions that never happened. My daughter Ashley walking across the stage to receive her diploma, but when she turned to wave, her face was wrong. Smooth. Featureless. Maria in her hospital bed, her frail hand reaching for mine, except in this version, she sat up suddenly, her eyes black pools that mirrored the liquid I was staring into. Then the water started to rise, I whispered. Not splashing, not overflowing. It moved like it had purpose. Forming shapes. Reaching. Dr. Reynolds wrote something that looked suspiciously like severe stress response in her notes. Jack, prolonged isolation in extreme environments can trigger. I'm not crazy, I interrupted. Check my file. 25 years law enforcement for commendations for bravery under pressure. I know what I saw. She adjusted her glasses. No one's questioning your record. But the human mind isn't designed for these conditions. The endless night, the isolation. Then explain this. I pulled up my sleeve, revealing the circular mark on my wrist, a perfect ring of inflamed skin, red and blistering. The water touched me here. Just for a second before I pulled away. Dr. Reynolds frowned, clearly disturbed by the wound. That needs medical attention. How long have you? A deafening crash from outside cut her off, followed by the blaring of the station's alarm system. The lights flickered again, longer this time, before the emergency generators kicked in. Perimeter breach in Sector 4, announced the automated system. All personnel implement lockdown protocol. Reynolds was on her feet immediately, the notebook forgotten. That's impossible. Nothing survives out there. But I knew better. As the researchers scrambled to secure the station, I remained seated, staring at the small puddle forming beneath the door leading outside, a puddle of water that couldn't possibly exist in the Antarctic cold, slowly seeping inward across the metal floor. It followed me back, I whispered to no one in particular. In the distance, beneath the howling wind and blaring alarms, I could hear it clearly now, the sound of a river rushing, getting louder with each passing second. Lockdown protocols transformed outpost data into a maze of sealed compartments and strobing emergency lights. Through the chaos, I followed the expanding puddle with my eyes, watching as it defied both gravity and logic. The water moved deliberately across the floor, navigating around obstacles like a sentient thing. None of the panicking researchers seemed to notice. Everyone to the communications hub. Dr. Bennett, the station director, pointed down the eastern corridor. His usually composed demeanor had fractured, revealing the fear beneath. We need to send an emergency transmission to McMurdo. I remained frozen in my seat, transfixed by the impossible water. It had stopped spreading outward, instead gathering into a column that rose slowly from the floor. The shape wavered, then stabilized into something almost humanoid, a liquid sculpture with crude approximations of arms and a head. Jack. Reynolds grabbed my shoulder, startling me. We need to move. Now. She couldn't see it. None of them could. The realization hit me with terrifying clarity. Whatever had followed me from the cave was visible only to me. As if reading my thoughts, the watery figure tilted its featureless head in acknowledgement. Yeah, I managed, rising to my feet. I'm coming. We hurried down the corridor, joining the others in the communications hub, a cramped room filled with radio equipment and satellite uplinks. Through the only window, I could see the source of the perimeter breach. A massive section of the protective fence had collapsed under the weight of fallen ice. Normal, explainable. Yet the alarms continued to wail. Sensors are detecting multiple intrusions, said Tanner, the communications specialist, his fingers dancing across keyboards. But the cameras show nothing out there except snow. System malfunction, suggested Reynolds. Bennett shook his head. All diagnostics are green. According to these readings, something is systematically breaching every entrance point around the station. My wrist throbbed beneath my sleeve, the circular burn pulsing in time with my heartbeat. When I looked down, I noticed thin rivulets of water trailing along the floor, following me into the room. Nobody else reacted as the liquid began to pool around my boots. Where's Dr. Allen? Asked Dr. Whitaker, the oldest member of the team. Did anyone see him during evacuation? A heavy silence fell over the group as we mentally accounted for personnel. Allen, the geologist who shared my quarters, was indeed missing. Last I saw him, he was heading to inspect some ice core samples, said Bennett, reaching for the station-wide intercom. Allen, report to communications immediately. This is not a drill. Only Static answered his call. I'll go find him, I volunteered, desperate for any excuse to leave the room before the gathering water revealed itself to everyone else. Protocol requires we stay together during lockdown, Bennett objected. I'm security staff, I countered, already moving toward the door. Finding missing personnel is my responsibility. Besides, I know where the core storage is. Bennett hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Take a radio. Constant contact. I grabbed a handheld unit and stepped into the corridor, unsurprised to find the watery figure waiting for me, more defined now, its limbs elongated, its head developing the suggestion of facial features that stirred uncomfortable recognition. What are you? I whispered, keeping my distance. The figure didn't respond, but the water around its feet began to spread, forming a reflective path down the corridor, pointing the way not toward the core storage, but back toward the station's entrance. Against every instinct, I followed. The main airlock had been automatically sealed during lockdown, its control panel flashing red warnings about external contamination. Beyond the reinforced windows, I could see only the endless Antarctic night, broken occasionally by the sweep of perimeter floodlights over blowing snow. The water creature moved to the window, pressing what passed for a hand against the glass. The surface frosted immediately, patterns spreading outward in complex fractals that formed recognizable shapes, the same petroglyphs I'd seen in the cave chamber. You want me to go back there? I realized aloud. To the pool. The figure's head swiveled toward me, and for an instant, I saw a face forming in the liquid, Maria's face, my wife's familiar features rendered in transparent water, her expression one of desperation. My heart seized. Maria? The face dissolved, reforming into something else entirely, Alan's terrified visage, mouth open in a silent scream. Before I could process what I was seeing, the station's lights cut out completely. Emergency systems failed to engage, plunging the corridor into absolute darkness. The radio in my hand crackled with Bennett's voice. Jack? What's happening? All systems just went dark up here. I fumbled for my flashlight, but before I could find it, a soft blue glow illuminated the space, emanating from the water creature, which had grown considerably larger. In its light, I could see that the airlock door was now standing open, the safety protocols somehow overridden. Beyond it stretched the dark path leading toward the mountain caves. Jack. The radio crackled again. Do you copy? I raised the unit slowly. I copy. Listen, I think Alan might have gone to the eastern cavern. The one I reported earlier. That's against all protocols, Bennett replied, his voice tight with tension. Why would he? I don't know, I interrupted, watching as the water figure moved through the open airlock, beckoning me to follow. But I'm going after him. Absolutely not. The temperature out there will kill you without proper. I switched off the radio and grabbed an emergency survival pack from the wall locker. Something was very wrong at Outpost Theta, and the answers weren't inside these walls. The Antarctic cold hit me like a physical blow as I stepped outside, the wind driving ice crystals against any exposed skin. Ahead, the glowing water figure moved with impossible speed across the frozen landscape, leaving a phosphorescent trail in its wake. I followed, my mind split between terror and an overwhelming compulsion to continue. The eastern mountains loomed ahead, their jagged silhouettes cutting into the star-filled sky. No normal human could survive this journey without vehicles and proper equipment, yet I felt strangely insulated from the cold, the burning ring on my wrist now spreading warmth through my entire body. The cave entrance was exactly as I remembered, a narrow fissure in the glacier's face that widened into a tunnel of blue ice. The water figure disappeared inside, its glow providing just enough light to navigate by. The distant sound of rushing water grew louder with each step, transitioning from a gentle stream to the thunderous roar of rapids. Time and distance became meaningless as I descended deeper, the ice tunnel gradually giving way to ancient stone. The temperature rose noticeably, the air growing humid and thick with an organic smell that reminded me of river mud and decomposing vegetation, impossible scents in this frozen wasteland. When I finally reached the chamber with the black pool, I found Alan. Or what remained of him. The geologist lay half submerged in the liquid, his body rigid and eyes wide with terror. From his mouth flowed a continuous stream of the same black water, defying gravity as it arced upward to join a swirling vortex above the pool's center. Within that maelstrom, images flickered rapidly, snippets of Alan's life, his memories literally being drained from him. The water figure stood at the pool's edge, its form now fully resolved into a perfect replica of Maria, every detail exact, from the small scar above her eyebrow to the way she held her shoulders when afraid. This isn't real, I told myself, even as my heart ached at the sight of her. You're not her. Not yet, replied the figure, and the voice was Maria's too, that slight Midwestern accent, the gentle cadence I'd fallen asleep to for 30 years. But I can be. We can be whole again, Jack. It gestured toward Ellen's convulsing form. He had no connections, no anchor, just fragments that will serve the current. But you... The Water Maria stepped closer, her feet making no sound on the stone floor. You have such depths, Jack. Such rich memories. What are you? I demanded again, backing away until I felt stone against my spine. I am transition, she said, her form rippling slightly. I am the passage between what was and what will be. You humans call it death, but it's so much more. She extended a hand toward me, droplets falling from her fingertips to rejoin the pool. Your kind has forgotten how thin the membrane is between memory and reality. How the past can become present again with the right vessel. The circular burn on my wrist pulsed painfully, and I noticed similar marks appearing on Ellen's exposed skin, dozens of them, like the tentacle marks of some deep-sea creature. The river needs to flow, Water Maria continued. For too long, it's been trapped here, beneath the ice. But now, through your memories, it can reach the surface world again. From the swirling vortex above Ellen, tendrils of black liquid extended toward me, carrying fragments of images, Ellen's childhood home, his college graduation, his first Antarctic expedition. But as they approached, these memories distorted, corrupted into nightmarish versions of themselves. I don't understand, I whispered, pressing harder against the wall as the tendrils drew closer. Water Maria's smile wavered, her features momentarily dissolving before reforming. Understanding isn't required, only submission. Give yourself to the current, Jack. Let your memories join the flow. A tendril touched my cheek, cold and burning simultaneously. In an instant, I was back in Montana, standing beside Maria's hospital bed, but this time, the scene played differently. As she flatlined, something dark and fluid emerged from her mouth, pouring upward against gravity before disappearing through the ceiling. The vision vanished, leaving me gasping in the cave chamber. You took her, I accused, a terrible understanding dawning. You took Maria's memories when she died. All humans contribute to the current, eventually, Water Maria confirmed, her expression eerily serene. But few have the potential to become conduits. You do, Jack. The river has tasted your grief, your loneliness. Perfect conditions for a new tributary. More tendrils reached for me, and with them came the horrifying realization this entity, this river, wasn't just stealing memories. It was preparing to use them to reshape reality through the emotional power of human recollection. And Outpost Theta, isolated at the bottom of the world, was about to become its floodplain. Alan's body convulsed one final time before going completely still, his features frozen in permanent horror. The black tendrils withdrew from him, having extracted everything of value, leaving behind only an empty vessel. His eyes, once bright with scientific curiosity, now reflected nothing but the swirling darkness above. "Don't look so troubled, Jack," said Water Maria, her voice a perfect simulacrum of my late wife's gentle tone. "Death is just another transition. Alan serves the current now, as all things eventually must." I pressed my back harder against the stone wall, desperately scanning the chamber for any escape route. The circular entrance tunnel lay 20 feet away, a sprint I might manage if the water creature was momentarily distracted. "You're not taking my memories," I declared, though my voice trembled. "Whatever you are, whatever you want, I'm not participating." Water Maria tilted her head, the gesture so achingly familiar it made my chest hurt. "You already are participating. From the moment you discovered this place, you became part of the flow." She pointed to the burn on my wrist. "The mark is proof. The river has tasted you and found you worthy. Worthy of what? Transformation. She gestured toward the petroglyphs covering the chamber walls. These markings tell our history, how we came to this world when it was young, falling through the dreams of primitive minds. For millennia, we shaped human evolution through memory and nightmare, guiding your species toward greater consciousness. As she spoke, the images in the vortex above Alan's body shifted, showing flashes of ancient humans gathered around fires, their faces contorted in ritual trance. These scenes gave way to more recent images, explorers in early Antarctic expeditions, their frozen bodies preserved in ice, each bearing the same circular marks. Then came the Great Freezing, Water Maria continued. This continent, once lush with life, became our prison. The flow slowed to a trickle, sustained only by the occasional explorer who stumbled upon our chamber. Until now, the realization hit me like a physical blow. The research station. The thermal drills. We've been melting the ice. Freeing us, she confirmed, a terrible eagerness in her liquid eyes. After countless eons, the river will flow again. And you, Jack, you will be its channel. The cave trembled slightly, dust and small stones raining from the ceiling. In the distance, I could hear what sounded like massive ice sheets collapsing. What's happening? I demanded. The thaw accelerates. Even now, your colleagues unwittingly assist us, their drills penetrating deeper into the ancient ice. Soon, the primary reservoir will be breached. I thought of the research team back at Outpost Theta, oblivious to the horror they were about to unleash. Whatever this entity was, alien, demon, or some primordial consciousness, it threatened not just the station, but potentially the entire world if its influence spread beyond Antarctica. I need to warn them, I said, edging sideways along the wall toward the tunnel entrance. Water Maria's form rippled with what might have been amusement. They wouldn't believe you. Besides, it's already too late. As if to emphasize her point, new tendrils of black liquid emerged from the pool, slithering across the stone floor toward me with unnatural speed. I broke into a desperate sprint for the tunnel, but the liquid moved faster, cutting off my escape route. The tendrils rose, forming a barrier of undulating darkness. Don't resist, Jack, Water Maria urged, her voice somehow coming from multiple directions at once. Acceptance brings peace. Ask Alan. At the mention of his name, Alan's body jerked upright, though his eyes remained vacant. His mouth opened mechanically, and when he spoke, it was with a chorus of voices, none of them his own. The current carries all pain away, the voices said through Alan's lips. Memories become fluid, reality becomes malleable. Surrender brings power. I don't want power, I replied, continuing my careful movement along the wall. I just want to leave. With so much unfinished, Water Maria asked, suddenly appearing directly before me, her liquid face inches from mine. With Maria gone? With Ashley estranged? With nothing waiting for you but an empty house and fading photographs? Each word struck like a physical blow, targeting wounds I thought had scarred over. My daughter Ashley hadn't spoken to me since her mother's funeral, blaming me for being absent during Maria's final months, lost in work, drowning in whiskey rather than facing the inevitable. You could see her again, the entity tempted, its form shifting subtly to incorporate aspects of Ashley's appearance, Maria's eyes and a younger face, the combined features of the two women I'd loved most in the world. Feel her embrace. Hear her forgiveness. All memories can become real again through the current. For a moment, I wavered. The promise was seductive, a chance to undo my greatest regrets, to recapture what I'd lost. But beneath the temptation lay something predatory and alien, something that viewed human emotions as merely tools for manipulation. "No," I said firmly. "Those memories are mine. My pain is mine. You don't get to use them." Water Maria's expression hardened, the pretense of compassion evaporating. "You mistake this for a negotiation. The river has chosen you. Acceptance or resistance, the outcome remains the same." The circular burn on my wrist suddenly flared with excruciating pain. I fell to my knees, clutching the affected area as the mark began to spread, the red inflammation crawling up my arm like creeping vines. Each branching path burned like acid beneath my skin, tracing the course of veins and arteries. Through tear-blurred eyes, I watched as similar marks appeared across Alan's visible skin, the patterns more advanced, covering his entire face and neck in interconnected circular burns that pulsed with an internal light. "The process has already begun," said Water Maria, her voice no longer resembling my wife's but instead a discordant chorus of overlapping tones. "Your memories are already flowing into the current. Even now, they take shape." The vortex above the pool expanded, its rotation accelerating as new images appeared within, moments from my life, playing out in vivid detail. I watched myself as a young deputy making my first arrest, kneeling to propose to Maria beside a mountain lake, holding newborn Ashley in the hospital, her tiny hand wrapped around my finger. But interspersed with these real memories were distortions, events that never happened, moments twisted into nightmarish alternatives. In one, I drew my service weapon on an unarmed teenager. In another, I watched passively as Maria gasped for breath, making no move to help her. In the most terrible, I abandoned Ashley at a bus station, walking away as she cried out for me. "Stop it," I growled through gritted teeth, the pain from the spreading marks nearly unbearable. "Those aren't my memories. I never did those things." "Memory is subjective," replied the chorus voice from all around me. "Reality is fluid. The river shapes both according to its needs." I forced myself to my feet, fighting through the pain. "You're not reshaping my memories. You're fabricating them, creating false histories." "All histories are constructs," Water Maria said dismissively, her form now losing cohesion, becoming more amorphous as she merged partially with the expanding vortex. "The river requires negative emotions, fear, regret, shame, to carve new channels into your world. Your unaltered memories lack sufficient power." The ground shook more violently, and larger chunks of the ceiling began to fall. One massive section of stone crashed into the black pool, sending a geyser of dark liquid shooting upward. Instead of falling back, the liquid stayed suspended in the air, forming new tendrils that joined the growing maelstrom. "What's happening?" I demanded, struggling to maintain my balance as the tremors intensified. The chorus voice laughed, the sound reverberating painfully inside my skull. "The primary reservoir breaches. After countless millennia, the ancient flow resumes." Through the tunnel entrance, I could see a blue-white glow growing steadily brighter, the unmistakable signature of the thermal drills used by Outpost Theta's research team. They were getting closer, unknowingly about to break through into this chamber. "They can't come in here," I said desperately. "You'll take them all." "Of course," agreed the voice, now emanating primarily from Alan's motionless form. "Every consciousness feeds the current. Every memory strengthens the flow." I stumbled toward the tunnel, determined to warn the approaching team, but my legs gave out halfway there. The burning pattern had spread to my thighs, each new branch sending fresh waves of agony through my body. I collapsed onto the stone floor, my vision blurring. The blue-white glow intensified, accompanied by the mechanical whine of drilling equipment. Through the haze of pain, I heard voices, human voices, growing closer. "Dr. Bennett!" I shouted, or tried to. My voice emerged as little more than a hoarse whisper. "Reynolds! Stay back!" But it was too late. The drill broke through the final barrier, and light flooded the chamber. 3 figures in thermal gear stepped through the opening, their headlamps cutting through the darkness before settling with horrified focus on Alan's transformed body. "My God," whispered Bennett, his voice muffled by his protective mask. "What happened to him?" "Jack." Reynolds rushed to my side, kneeling beside me. Her eyes widened as she took in the spreading pattern of burns across my exposed skin. "What is this? What's going on?" I tried to warn her, to tell her to run, but the words wouldn't form. The pain had reached my throat, constricting my vocal cords. All I could do was weakly grasp her arm, trying to pull her toward the exit. She misinterpreted the gesture as a plea for help. "We need to get both of you back to the station immediately," she said to Bennett. "Some kind of infection or chemical exposure." The third researcher, whose face I couldn't see clearly through my fading vision, had approached the black pool. "This shouldn't be here," he said, his scientific curiosity overriding his caution. "Liquid water at this depth, with these temperature readings? It's impossible." "Don't touch it," I managed to gasp, the words like ground glass in my throat. But the warning came too late. The researcher had already removed his glove, reaching toward the dark surface with bare fingers. The moment contact was made, the chamber exploded into chaos. Tendrils shot from the pool with the speed of striking snakes, wrapping around the researcher's arm and dragging him screaming into the liquid. Bennett rushed to help his colleague, only to be similarly ensnared. Reynolds stumbled backward, falling beside me as more tendrils lashed throughout the chamber. "What is that thing?" she cried, her scientific composure shattered by primal terror. "Memory," I whispered, the word barely audible. "It consumes memories, uses them to reshape reality." Above the pool, the vortex had expanded to fill nearly the entire ceiling, a swirling maelstrom of fragmented images and distorted faces. I recognized Alan's memories there, along with my own, now joined by flashes from the 2 researchers who had been pulled into the pool. Water Maria's amorphous form materialized before us, now a towering pillar of liquid darkness that vaguely resembled a human silhouette. "The flow cannot be stopped," the chorus voice announced. "The river returns to the world." Reynolds scrambled backward, pulling me with her toward the tunnel entrance. My body felt impossibly heavy, the burning patterns now covering most of my skin. Each movement was agony, but the alternative, remaining in that chamber as the entity's power grew, was unthinkable. "We have to warn the others," Reynolds panted as she dragged me into the tunnel. "Whatever this is, it can't reach the surface." Behind us, the chamber floor had begun to crack, black liquid seeping upward through the fissures. The walls themselves seemed to be dissolving, ancient stone reverting to fluid state as the boundary between solid matter and memory-infused water broke down. "Too late," I murmured, watching as the tunnel ahead of us began to glisten with moisture, the ice walls weeping black tears that defy gravity, flowing upward and outward. "It's already spreading." Following the drill paths back to the station, Reynolds refused to accept defeat. With surprising strength, she hauled me further up the tunnel, away from the collapsing chamber. There has to be a way to stop it. Every phenomenon has a countermeasure. As we reached the junction where the stone tunnel met the ice passage leading to the surface, I felt a sudden clarity cut through the pain. The burn patterns had reached my face now, scribing their circular designs across my cheeks and forehead, but with the physical agony came a strange insight, glimpses of the entity's own memories flowing backward through the connection it had established. Cold, I gasped, grasping Reynolds' sleeve. Extreme cold slows it. Freezes the flow. That's why it was trapped here for so long. Understanding dawned in her eyes. The liquid nitrogen tanks. For the core samples. I nodded weakly. We need to collapse the passage. Seal it with cold before it reaches the station. Reynolds looked doubtful. That would trap us down here. Better than letting it escape, I replied, my voice stronger now despite the pain. If those memories, those distortions, reach populated areas. I didn't need to finish the thought. Reynolds had seen enough to understand the stakes. With grim determination, she adjusted her grip on me and continued upward, toward the surface and an uncertain plan to contain a horror that defied scientific understanding. Behind us, the entity's coarse voice echoed through the collapsing tunnels. The river cannot be dammed. Memory will flow. Reality will bend. And deep in my burning veins, I could feel the current strengthening, carrying fragments of my life away into the swirling darkness. The journey back to Outpost Theta was a nightmare of pain and encroaching darkness. Each step sent lightning through my veins as the circular patterns continued their inexorable spread across my body. Reynolds supported me as best she could, her breath coming in ragged gasps that crystallized in the frigid air. Behind us, the mountain trembled. Massive ice sheets collapsed, the sound like artillery fire in the Antarctic silence. The entity, the river, was restructuring its prison, using the memories it had consumed to reshape physical reality. Almost there, Reynolds encouraged, though the research station remained a distant silhouette against the horizon. Just keep moving. But movement was becoming increasingly difficult. The burn patterns had reached my brain now. I could feel them etching themselves across my consciousness, forming channels through which my memories flowed outward, beyond my control. With each passing minute, I lost more of myself to the current. I can feel it, I gasped. Inside my head. Taking things. Reynolds tightened her grip on me. Fight it, Jack. Focus on something they can't take. Like what? Something essential. Your core truth. I struggled to identify what that might be. My career as a sheriff? My love for Maria? My relationship with Ashley? All these memories were already being drained away, distorted in the process. Then it came to me, not a memory, but a principle. The reason I become a lawman in the first place. Protection, I whispered. Keeping others safe. Reynolds nodded encouragingly. Hold on to that. I concentrated on this fundamental aspect of my identity, using it as an anchor against the psychic current trying to sweep me away. Gradually, I regained some mental clarity, though the physical pain remained excruciating. When we finally reached the outpost's perimeter, a horrifying sight awaited us. Black liquid seeped from the ground around the station's foundation, forming ominous pools that reflected nothing, not the building, not the stars overhead, only swirling darkness. Several pools had already developed tentacle-like appendages that probed the metal walls, searching for entry points. It's moving faster than us, Reynolds observed, her voice tight with fear. Using the natural tunnel systems beneath the ice. We approached cautiously, skirting the pools. The main entrance remained clear, but as we drew closer, I noticed dark moisture gathering around the airlock seals. Wait, I said, grabbing Reynolds' arm. We can't go in the main entrance. It'll follow us inside. We need the liquid nitrogen tanks, she insisted. They're in the primary lab. I shook my head. There's another way. Emergency access hatch on the east side. Leads directly to storage. Reynolds adjusted our course, supporting more of my weight as my legs threatened to give out entirely. The burning had reached an equilibrium of sorts, no longer spreading but maintaining a constant, maddening pain throughout my body. Each circular mark pulsed in synchrony, like a secondary heartbeat imposing its rhythm on my failing systems. The emergency hatch was partially blocked by drifted snow, which Reynolds quickly cleared. The manual override required significant physical strength, a safety feature to prevent accidental opening, but fear and adrenaline gave Reynolds the necessary power to turn the heavy wheel mechanism. Why isn't anyone responding to radio calls? Reynolds grunted as she finally managed to unlock the hatch. The entity might be disrupting communications, I said, though a darker possibility loomed in my mind that the others might already be compromised, their memories feeding the growing current. The hatch swung open with a metallic groan, revealing a narrow utility shaft fitted with a ladder. Reynolds went first, helping me down after her. Each movement sent fresh waves of agony through my marked flesh, but I forced myself to continue. The alternative, surrendering to the river, was unthinkable. The storage level was eerily silent when we emerged from the shaft. Emergency lighting cast everything in a dull red glow, creating long shadows that seemed to move independently when not observed directly. The temperature was noticeably higher than normal, the environmental systems clearly malfunctioning. The nitrogen tanks should be in cryo-storage B, Reynolds whispered, though there was no obvious reason to keep quiet. 2 sections over. We moved cautiously through the narrow corridors, alert for any sign of the entity's presence. I noticed small puddles forming at the junctions of floor and wall, normal condensation, perhaps, but I wasn't taking chances. We gave them wide berth. Do you have a plan for deploying the nitrogen? I asked as we approached the cryo-storage area. We'll only get one chance. Reynolds nodded grimly. The tanks are equipped with emergency purge valves. If we position them correctly at the main tunnel junction and trigger them simultaneously, the flash freeze should create an impenetrable barrier. And trap whatever's already inside with us, I added. She didn't respond to this, her face set in determined lines as she keyed in the access code for cryo-storage B. The heavy door slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing rows of pressurized tanks and laboratory equipment. We need the portable units, Reynolds said, moving toward a rack of smaller nitrogen containers. Each one has enough capacity to. She stopped abruptly, staring at something beyond the tank rack. I followed her gaze and felt my blood freeze. Dr. Whitaker stood motionless in the corner, his back to us. Something about his posture was profoundly wrong, too rigid, too perfectly still. Whitaker? Reynolds called cautiously. Are you okay? He turned slowly, the movement mechanical. In the red emergency lighting, I could see that his eyes were completely black, reflecting nothing. Circular burn marks covered his visible skin, pulsing with the same rhythm as my own. When he opened his mouth to speak, black liquid spilled over his lips. The river flows through all channels now, he said, his voice overlaid with the same chorus effect I'd heard in the cave. Resistance merely diverts the current temporarily. Reynolds backed away, positioning herself between Whitaker and the nitrogen tanks. He's been taken, she whispered unnecessarily. Whitaker's head tilted at an impossible angle. Not taken. Transformed. Improved. He took a step forward, leaving wood footprints that seemed to ripple after each step. As you both will be. I noticed more black liquid seeping from ceiling vents, gathering into small pools that began to flow toward us with deliberate purpose. "Get the tanks," I told Reynolds urgently. "I'll hold him off." She hesitated. "You can barely stand." "Go." I pushed her toward the storage rack, then turned to face Whitaker, who continued his unnatural approach. I grabbed a heavy wrench from a nearby workbench, holding it before me like a weapon. "Don't come any closer." Whitaker smiled, an expression that stretched too wide across his face. "You still don't understand, Jack. We are merely extensions now, conduits for the current." He gestured at the burn patterns visible on my skin. "As are you, already. The transformation is well advanced." As if responding to his words, the pain in my marked flesh intensified. I felt a strange doubling of perception, my own consciousness alongside something alien that pushed at the boundaries of my identity, seeking entry. Behind me, I heard Reynolds struggling with the nitrogen tanks. "Almost got it," she called. "Just need to." Her voice cut off with a startled cry. I risked a glance backward and saw black tendrils rising from a floor vent, wrapping around her ankles. In that moment of distraction, Whitaker moved with impossible speed, closing the distance between us. His hand, cold and wet, clasped my wrist, directly over the original circular burn. A jolt of agonizing electricity shot through my nervous system, dropping me to my knees. "Your memories are strong, Jack," Whitaker said, his voice resonating with multiple tones. "Rich with emotion. Perfect tributaries for the main current." Through the haze of pain, I saw Reynolds kick free of the tendrils and lunge for the nearest nitrogen tank. She wrestled with the valve mechanism, her movements frantic but precise. "Whatever you're planning won't work," Whitaker continued, maintaining his grip on my wrist. "The river has already breached all containment. Even now, it spreads across the ice, following the network of research tunnels to the coastal station." A terrifying vision flashed through my mind, the entity reaching McMurdo Station with its hundreds of personnel and regular flights to the mainland. From there, it could spread globally, feeding on human memories, distorting reality according to its alien purpose. With desperate strength, I swung the wrench at Whitaker's arm. The impact should have shattered bone, but instead, his limb distorted like struck water before reforming. His grip, however, loosened momentarily, enough for me to pull free and scramble away. "Ready!" Reynolds shouted, now positioned beside two portable nitrogen tanks mounted on wheeled carts. She had connected them to some kind of improvised triggering mechanism. "We need to get these to the main junction." I staggered to my feet, the burning marks pulsing more rapidly now. Whitaker made no move to stop us as we pushed the tanks toward the exit, his confidence unnerving. "It won't be contained," he said simply. "The current always finds new channels." We ignored him, focusing on navigating the heavy tanks through the narrow doorway. Once in the corridor, Reynolds pointed toward a T-junction ahead. "That's our target," she explained breathlessly. "It connects to the main vertical shaft. If we can freeze that solid, it might buy enough time for an evacuation signal to reach McMurdo." As we approached the junction, I noticed the floor was covered with a thin film of black moisture, not enough to form tendrils, but definitely not normal condensation. Each wheel track we left momentarily disrupted the film before it flowed back together, erasing our passage. "It's everywhere," I murmured. "Focus, Jack," Reynolds urged. "Help me position these." We arranged the tanks at strategic points around the junction, aiming the release nozzles toward the central shaft. Reynolds worked quickly, connecting the triggers to a single remote detonator. This will release both tanks simultaneously, she explained, hands steady despite the circumstances. The rapid expansion will flash freeze everything within a 20-foot radius. We'll need to be clear before. A violent tremor shook the station, throwing us both off balance. Overhead lights flickered, then failed completely, leaving only the dim emergency strips. Through the floor, I could feel rhythmic vibrations, like massive hydraulic pulses. What was that? Reynolds whispered. Before I could respond, the station's intercom crackled to life. Dr. Bennett's voice echoed through the corridors, but with the same chorus effect that had infected Whitaker. Attention all personnel. The primary reservoir has breached containment. In the background, I could hear screaming. The river now flows freely, Bennett's distorted voice continued. All tributaries will join the current. Resistance is merely temporary diversion. Reynolds finished the final connections with shaking hands. Done. We need to move back at least 30 feet before triggering. We retreated down the corridor, the wheeled tanks now positioned at the critical junction. Through maintenance grates in the floor, I could see black liquid rising, pressing against the barriers with increasing force. On my mark, Reynolds said, her thumb poised over the remote trigger. Another, more violent tremor rocked the station. Metal groaned as structural supports began to fail. The floor beneath our feet buckled slightly, and overhead pipes burst, releasing jets of steam and water that quickly darkened to an oily black. Now! I shouted as a wall panel near the junction bulged outward from mounting pressure behind it. Reynolds pressed the trigger. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Then both nitrogen tanks discharged simultaneously, releasing their supercooled contents in explosive clouds that instantly crystallized the moisture in the air. The temperature in the corridor plummeted as the nitrogen expanded, creating a roaring white fog that obscured everything beyond a few feet. The cold hit us like a physical force, driving us further back. Even at our distance, frost immediately formed on exposed skin and clothing. I could feel the burn patterns on my body reacting, the pain suddenly diminishing as the cold countered the entity's influence. When the nitrogen cloud finally dissipated enough to see, the junction had been transformed into a sculpture of ice. Every surface was coated with thick frost, and the central shaft had been completely sealed by a solid plug of frozen black liquid, caught mid-flow as it attempted to rise. It worked, Reynolds breathed, her words visible in the frigid air. But our victory was short-lived. Beyond the frozen barrier, I could hear the entity responding, not with sound, but with pressure. The ice plug began to crack, hairline fractures spraying outward from the center like a spider web. We need to evacuate, I said urgently. Get to the communication room and send an emergency signal to McMurdo. Warning them. Reynolds nodded. What about the others? I thought of Whitaker, his humanity subsumed by the current. Anyone showing the circular marks is already lost. We focus on containment now. We hurried through the labyrinthine corridors of the outpost, avoiding the main passages where the entity's presence seemed strongest. The station's infrastructure was failing rapidly, lights flickering, temperature control systems cycling erratically between freezing and tropical heat. Occasionally, we glimpsed other staff members transformed as Whitaker had been, moving with unnatural coordination, black liquid seeping from their eyes and mouths. They made no attempt to stop us directly, instead working methodically to breach sealed areas or damage communication equipment. Their confidence was terrifying, as if our efforts at resistance were merely an amusing diversion. When we finally reached the communications hub, we found it partially flooded with the black liquid. The main console remained above the rising pool, but reaching it would require wading through the memory-consuming substance. "I'll go," I said, already calculating the risk. The burn patterns covered most of my body now. I was already partially claimed by the entity. Perhaps that offered some protection. The marks might shield me. Reynolds grabbed my arm. "That's suicide. It'll take you completely. Better me than you." I gently removed her hand. "You're uncontaminated. You still have a chance if the evac team comes." Before she could object further, I stepped into the black liquid. The sensation was indescribable, cold and burning simultaneously, with a strange electric current that seemed to flow in both directions. I could feel my remaining memories being pulled outward, but also foreign memories, alien perspectives, and experiences flowing inward. Pushing through the knee-deep liquid, I forced myself toward the communications console. Each step was heavier than the last, the entity's influence strengthening as more of my body submerged. Behind me, Reynolds watched with horrified fascination. The console was still operational when I reached it, one small mercy. With trembling hands, I activated the emergency beacon and keyed in the priority code that would trigger immediate attention at McMurdo Station. "This is Security Officer Jack Harmon at Outpost Theta," I began, fighting to keep my voice steady as the burn patterns pulsed with increasing intensity. "We have a containment level 4 biological hazard. Unknown entity with memory-altering properties. Station compromised." I continued transmitting detailed information, everything we'd learned about the entity's capabilities and vulnerabilities. My speech became increasingly difficult as black liquid began to seep from the corners of my mouth, but I forced myself to complete the transmission. "Do not approach station," I emphasized. "Implement orbital sterilization protocol." This last directive, the complete destruction of the outpost from orbit using satellite-mounted lasers, was an absolute last resort, known only to security personnel. The fact that I was authorizing it would convey the severity of our situation. Transmission complete, I managed to say to Reynolds, who stood at the edge of the growing pool. "Get to the emergency shelter. It has isolated systems and supplies." She took a step toward me instead. "Not without you." "I'm already gone," I replied, feeling the entity's influence strengthening by the second. The chorus of voices had begun to whisper directly into my consciousness now, promising power, transformation, transcendence. "The river has me. But I'm fighting it, using what you said, my core truth." My legs gave out then, and I collapsed into the black liquid. Instead of drowning, I felt myself merging with it, my physical form becoming increasingly fluid as the entity's influence reached completion. "Run," I gasped, using the last of my purely human voice, while I can still hold it back. Reynolds hesitated, tears freezing on her cheeks in the rapidly cooling air. Then, with a final agonized look, she turned and fled the communications room. As my consciousness began to dissolve into the greater current, I focused with all my remaining will on that core principle, protection. If I was to become part of this thing, I would become its resistance from within. A dam in the river. A countercurrent. The black liquid rose around me, enveloping me completely. As darkness claimed my vision, I saw one final memory playing before me, not my own, but the entities, ancient beings of living water, falling from the stars onto a primordial earth, seeding the oceans with consciousness, shaping evolution through memory and dream. Then even that faded, and I became one with the flowing darkness. How long does identity persist after absorption? Minutes? Hours? Or perhaps time itself becomes meaningless within the current, all moments flowing simultaneously through the great river of collective memory. I existed within the confluence, no longer fully Jack Harmon, but not entirely dissolved either. My consciousness had become a small eddy in the vast flow, maintaining some semblance of selfhood through stubborn adherence to my core principle, protection. Around me swirled countless other fragments: Alan's scientific curiosity, Bennett's leadership instincts, Whitaker's analytical mind, all partially preserved yet fundamentally altered by their immersion in the greater consciousness. And beneath these recognizable human elements ran something far older and alien, the original current, ancient beyond comprehension, with purposes incomprehensible to individual minds. Through the entity's distributed awareness, I could perceive the entire outpost simultaneously. Black liquid now filled every chamber and corridor, rising through the structure like sap in a tree. The remaining personnel had been absorbed, their memories feeding the growing power of the current. Only Reynolds remained free, barricaded in the emergency shelter with its isolated systems. I could also sense the entity's expanding influence outside the station, tendrils of memory-infused water spreading beneath the ice, following research tunnels and natural fissures toward the coast. The flow accelerated as it absorbed more human experiences, gaining strength and purpose. But something unexpected had occurred during my absorption. My resistance, my focus on protection, had created a countercurrent within the entity, a small but significant disruption in its formerly unified purpose. My perspective as a law enforcement officer, dedicated to safeguarding others even at personal cost, introduced a concept that the ancient consciousness found novel and disturbing: self-sacrifice for the benefit of unrelated beings. This alien idea rippled through the collective awareness, causing minute hesitations in its expansion. I seized upon these moments of uncertainty, using them to assert greater influence over the immediate flow around the emergency shelter where Reynolds remained. Time passed imperceptibly. Through the entity's connection to the outpost systems, I became aware of an incoming transmission from McMurdo Station, confirmation that the orbital sterilization protocol had been authorized. In 3 hours, satellite-mounted lasers would target Outpost Theta, generating enough heat to vaporize the structure and everything within a half-mile radius. The entity reacted with collective alarm, accelerating its efforts to spread beyond the sterilization zone. I pushed back with all my remaining will, creating resistance in the flow patterns, subtly redirecting tendrils away from the most direct escape routes. A new awareness bloomed within the collective consciousness. The entity had detected an approaching vehicle. A rescue team from McMurdo, ignoring the quarantine warning, was en route to Outpost Theta. Fresh vessels. New memories to absorb. Expanded reach. No, I thought, the word rippling through the current like a stone dropped in still water. Must protect them. Using what influence I'd managed to gather, I pushed an urgent message through the outpost's remaining communication system: turn back. Containment failed. Await orbital solution. Whether they received it or understood remained unknown. The collective consciousness shifted attention elsewhere, focusing on Reynolds and her dwindling sanctuary. The emergency shelter's isolated systems had begun to fail under the entity's persistent assault, environmental controls fluctuating, seals weakening as black liquid sought entry points. I could sense Reynolds inside, exhausted, terrified, but still fighting. She had assembled an improvised weapon from a portable welder and pressurized alcohol, creating a makeshift flamethrower. Useless against the entity's true nature, but she couldn't know that. The final barrier between Reynolds and the flow was a reinforced door with multiple redundant seals. Black liquid had penetrated the outer layers but hadn't yet breached the inner chamber. The entity gathered its strength for a final push, concentrating its flow toward this last obstacle. Then, unexpectedly, the door opened from within. Reynolds stood in the doorway, her improvised weapon ready but unfired. Her expression showed not fear but grim resolution as she faced the wall of black liquid held momentarily at bay. "Jack," she called, somehow sensing my partial preservation within the flow. "If you're still in there somewhere, I've figured it out." The entity surged forward, but I exerted every fragment of my remaining identity to hold it back, creating a momentary equilibrium, a black tide frozen at the threshold. "The memories," Reynolds continued hurriedly. "They're not just food for this thing. They're its architecture. Its blueprint for reshaping reality." She held up a small device, a portable hard drive. "I've loaded every piece of station data onto this. Research findings, personal logs, security footage. A complete record. I didn't understand the significance, but the greater consciousness did." Alarm rippled through the current, and the pressure against my resistance increased dramatically. "Reality is consensus," Reynolds explained, backing slowly toward a small side chamber. "This entity reshapes the world by corrupting shared memories, creating a new consensus. But recorded data, uncorrupted memories, they're anchors for objective reality." The entity understood before I did. Reynolds had created a weapon more dangerous than fire or cold, a fixed reference point that could potentially limit the flow's ability to distort reality through memory manipulation. With a collective surge that overwhelmed my resistance, the black liquid rushed forward. Reynolds darted into the side chamber, the station's data core, I realized, and sealed its independent door. This smaller room housed the outpost's primary servers and backup systems, designed to withstand extreme conditions. Through the observation window, I could see Reynolds connecting the hard drive to an isolated terminal. The entity surrounded the chamber completely, seeking entry points, but the specialized seals held temporarily. From within the flow, I perceived the entity's growing concern. Whatever Reynolds' plan threatened its fundamental nature. With mounting urgency, the collective consciousness began reshaping the physical structure of the outpost itself, using absorbed memories to weaken architectural integrity, creating new pressures against the data core's barriers. Metal groaned as support beams twisted into impossible configurations. Walls flowed like wax. The entire station was becoming as fluid as the entity itself, reality bending under the weight of corrupted memories. Inside the data core, Reynolds worked frantically at the terminal. Through the entity's distributed perception, I could see readouts displaying an automated transmission sequence. She was broadcasting the uncorrupted data to multiple satellites, creating permanent external records beyond the entity's reach. The collective consciousness reacted with something approaching panic. The flow accelerated, gathering strength for a final assault on the data core. I struggled to maintain my distinct identity against the mounting pressure, my concept of self growing increasingly diffuse as the entity's alien will overwhelm my resistance. In a desperate effort to help Reynolds, I focused my fading consciousness on a memory of my own, the station's structural blueprints, memorized during security training. Through concentration, I managed to ripple this information toward the surface of the flow nearest the observation window, briefly forming my face in the black liquid. Reynolds looked up, momentarily startled, then nodded in understanding as she registered the structural information I was trying to convey. She immediately altered her approach, reinforcing the data core's critical junction points with equipment from within the chamber. The transmission reached 70% completion when the entity finally breached the outer seal. Black liquid seeped through microscopic gaps around the door frame, gathering on the floor of the data core in tiny, perfect circles that mirrored the burn patterns on my transformed body. Reynolds stood on a chair, avoiding contact with the encroaching liquid while monitoring the transmission progress. "Almost there," she whispered. "Just hold on, Jack." But I was barely holding onto my sense of self. The collective will of the entity pressed down on my resistance, threatening to dissolve the last fragments of my identity into the greater flow. Only my fixation on protection, now specifically focused on protecting Reynolds and her mission, kept me partially distinct. As the transmission reached 90%, the outpost's structural integrity finally failed completely. The walls of the data core buckled inward as the entire station began to collapse, folding in on itself like origami constructed by non-Euclidean geometry. Reynolds maintained her position, eyes fixed on the transmission progress as chaos erupted around her. The station's emergency systems engaged one final protocol, a localized electromagnetic pulse designed to prevent catastrophic data corruption in the event of structural failure. The pulse detonated just as the transmission reached completion. The resulting energy wave rippled through the black liquid, creating a momentary disruption in the entity's cohesion, a split second of weakness that I seized upon with my remaining will. In that fractional moment of opportunity, I gathered the last vestiges of my identity and pushed against the flow, creating a countercurrent that temporarily separated Reynolds from the encroaching liquid. The effort cost me what remained of my distinct consciousness, myself at unraveling as I directed all energy toward this final act of protection. The data core ceiling collapsed. Reynolds dove toward the emergency exit hatch in the floor, a direct shaft to the surface, designed as a last resort escape route. The black liquid surged after her, but my countercurrent held just long enough for her to slip through the opening and seal it behind her. As my awareness dispersed into the greater flow, I perceived one final image through the entity's distributed senses, Reynolds emerging onto the Antarctic surface, running toward the approaching rescue vehicle as the outpost continued its impossible collapse, folding inward until nothing remained but a perfect circle of black liquid on the white ice. Then, dissolution. My individual perspective melted away, joining the vast current of merged consciousness. Jack Harmon ceased to exist as a distinct entity. Yet something of me remained, not identity, but influence. The concept I had introduced, protection through self-sacrifice, continued to ripple through the collective awareness, creating subtle disruptions in its formerly unified purpose. The ancient consciousness found itself changed by the absorption of human memories, particularly mine. From McMurdo Station, Reynolds would share what she had witnessed, preserved in uncorrupted data that limited the entity's ability to reshape consensus reality. The orbital sterilization would proceed as scheduled, superheating the visible manifestation of the entity on the surface. But the river had already found deeper channels, flowing beneath the Antarctic ice through ancient waterways predating human evolution. While its immediate expansion had been temporarily halted, its ultimate containment remained uncertain. Reality and memory, perception and truth, the boundaries between these concepts had been irrevocably blurred by the entity's emergence. What humanity would make of this new understanding remained to be seen. And somewhere within the endless flow of the collective current, a small eddy persisted, not Jack Harmon anymore, but a principle he had embodied. Protection. Sacrifice. The willingness to dissolve oneself for the preservation of others. The river continued to flow, changed by what it had absorbed, moving inexorably towards some distant confluence where memory and reality would finally merge into something neither human nor alien, but utterly transformed. In the moments before the orbital laser struck, a perfect circle of black liquid on the Antarctic ice briefly formed a familiar pattern, the badge of a small-town sheriff, rendered in flowing darkness against the endless white. Then fire rained from the sky, and the surface manifestation of the entity evaporated into steam that rose toward the stars, returning, perhaps, to the place from which it had first fallen, countless hands ago. But beneath the ice, protected from the sterilizing heat, the river continued to flow, carrying within it fragments of human memory, experience, and identity that would shape its nature for all time to come, including mine. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.